Just so you know. Just so that they can have it to be able to listen to it other times.
Exactly.
Right?
I get it.
Yes. Well, going and being there's a lecture series, there's a class at Stanford that I've gone and lectured at multiple times, and there aren't any students there at all.
Oh, really?
None. And they just they watch all the lectures. They are taking the class, but they watch all the lectures at the end of the semester, and just sort of back to back, and they just watch, maybe at high speed.
No.
I think we're on. See if it works.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are usually a bunch
yes,
of
click on it.
And a lot of professors that will go, and there'll be interactions, and at least when I've been there,
What does it say?
you know, they're fairly well attended.
It says
but
it's waiting.
Not one student.
It says it's
And
waiting.
in fact, there was one I just asked, you know, can I get on the network? Is there anybody here
So how long
that has
till we're
credentials with Stanford?
not waiting?
None.
Okay.
But it was a class.
So I can keep refreshing the page. Again, in theory.
What I really like having the students be there
Yeah.
because
Where are you teaching?
I teach in Yale,
Right.
and there are a lot of
I've seen you speak either.
So are you sure that it's going?
It's
not coming up.
You studied some of the hacker communities.
Yeah, exactly. First open source, free software, development,
Right.
and then anonymous, which is like super different.
Yes.
Is my coat? Yeah, I need my coat, sorry.
So I'll do everything from
No, my coat's there too, right? Oh, you don't have my coat? Oh. No.
Sherry.
Thank you.
Sherry Berkel at MIT.
Oh, Turkle.
Sherry Turkle.
Yes.
So I took
We're
a
just-
class from her when I
We're
was
just verifying.
an undergraduate.
Nick?
It was completely wild because she was
We're just verifying that the stream's working, and then we're ready to go here.
Really like ahead of their time.
so she was trying to figure out, so how does this subculture work?
It's true, this is my first stream, so sorry ahead of time.
Did you take a class with her?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in trying to understand more systematically some of the open source world when we sort of go into these
So it says it's waiting.
projects where we're sort of trying to get an expectation of whether things are going to be participated in
Something's not
and
working.
things like that.
It's not working.
Where
It's not there.
often
It says waiting.
our expectations are completely wrong.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean,
The URL you gave me.
I studied Debian for a very long time.
Yes.
It's only when we're in Swartz Day, so we know it's right.
Fast speed procedures to basically introduce friction.
Could it
So
changed?
it's not easy to join. And you have to do all these tests, philosophical, legal, ethical, technical, in order to get in. And these procedures kind of help ensure a baseline, cultural baseline, technical. And then people feel proud that they've gone through this like year
Right.
of testing advice from like 16-year-old German hacker who's like, answer these 25 questions. And it's one of the reasons why they have succeeded so well.
Yes.
You know, they're almost now, they've outlived AOL, you know,
Right.
23, 24 years. And
So eTree has some of the same things. That's the taper-friendly community, the people that do band recordings of bands.
oh, okay.
And it is not easy to get through their thicket,
Right.
you know, because they're very precise. And but thousands have.
Right. And in fact, I think one of
It's
the big
interesting. You
mistakes
think
when people
friction might
What?
friction may be part of the success.
It is. I actually really believe it is. I mean, that's not entirely
thought it
once
was
or twice a year.
mostly Debian was mostly made out, not the Debian administrators, but the sort of the individual modules that make up most of Linux are professional people that are paid to write the code
Right.
in their professional context.
Debian's a weird beast where on the one hand, for sure, a lot of the maintainers and developers, as they're called, need Debian for work,
Yes.
right? Their allegiance to that project is precisely not work. You know, they have this allegiance to Debian as this institution and entity. It's like a guild, you know, of like these master craftsmen who've been working together for 15, 20 years and growing old together.
But are they supported in their jobs to not just supported by their jobs so that they can do it, but is it part of their job responsibilities to keep the I don't know, the device drivers for the SCSI drives working?
In many instances, no. In many instances,
By bulk of hours going into it, or how does it break down to like here's the I don't know condenser.
there's a smaller group who want the work. And again, like, it differs. Like, some are professors, and some of their research relates to Debian. So, this is next marriage. Or, my partner's Debian. He runs.
When you say a Debian developer, is this just one of the components that is Linux that make up the Linux, or is it actually the packaging of the Debian
It's a flavor
tree?
of Linux. And so basically, it's different software packages that will work with the Linux system, but they're configured for the Debian system.
So your husband, for instance, doesn't work on one of the device drivers that are shared between any of the packages. It's the
All right, cool. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm so sorry for the hold up.
Different pieces of software that
And thank you, everybody, for coming. It's time for the Hacker Culture panel with Gabriella Coleman and Brewster Kale from the Internet Archive. And we're basically, it seemed like a good time to talk a little bit more about like what actually happened in terms of the hack that Aaron did. And it really was an elegant hack in terms of what he did, which was just writing a script to download the journal articles faster. And if it hit the limit for the account, then he would create a new account and then go back to downloading again. And so it really just seemed like a time saver, really. And we learned from Alex Stamos, who was hired to be an independent consultant for the defense in the case, that there was actually agreements between JSTOR and MIT and Harvard, and that, and since Aaron was a Harvard fellow at the time, an ethics fellow of all things, he wasn't even breaking the law in that way when he downloaded all these articles. So there was no crime and no nefarious hacking at all. And so when people do sort of more questionable hacks in Aaron's name, it can sometimes make our skin crawl a little bit and just want to clarify that kind of stuff. And so that's why I thought it would be a good time, since I had Gabriella here. And it also gives us a chance to be able to talk about really if there's were other hacking situations that we wanted to talk about, or if you guys wanted to sort of try to figure out the one thing that's kind of been bugging you about this thing. It's kind of like, that's what Gabriella is really good for. And she can help us figure out. So we'll be able to hop around a little bit if you guys have questions, and that's why I wanted to leave room for questions. So I had Brewster come up here because Brewster's a hacker, and he was a hacker at MIT. He was a hacker at MIT with a guy named Marvin Minsky. And it's really interesting how these people are heroes or villains, depending on who's around at the time, and the sort of the atmosphere at the time, I think, has a lot to do with it too, political atmosphere. And so I wanted to ask Brewster to kind of start off with just talking about like when he was at MIT and how these kinds of hacks like downloading something faster when it was taking too long anyway, and that kind of thing, is really built into the culture at MIT. And it really wasn't anything different. It should have been sort of, you know, carrying on the traditions even, but even though it wasn't taken that way.
Yeah, what happened to Aaron is completely strange from the culture of MIT.
Thank you. Sorry.
Good enough? Listening? No? Not so good?
Can you hear him?
Okay, can you? We're not getting thumbs up in the back? All right, we're moving. Okay, late 70s.
Thank you.
Building and the artificial intelligence lab, hacking on Lisp machines. And at that point, we didn't sign code. Signing code was thought of as arrogant. So at the top of files, you didn't do that because it was a community project. You could tell who had written what code because people have different ways of writing code. But the idea, it was all for building the machine. It was a community project. And so this worked actually very, very well. And so the code could move back and forth, and we thought of ourselves as hackers and doing this job. I think what sort of went wrong in one of these circumstances was the 1976 Copyright Act, which declared everything copyrighted. Just like, you know, you spit on the ground and that's copyrighted life plus 50 and then extended. It's just, you know, it was stupid. And one of the first areas where the wheels came off the cart was in software and these community projects. So MIT, I think, in its wonderful wisdom said, well, if everything's owned, then the Lisp machine software is owned by us, and therefore we can fork it, and we can sell it to Symbolics. And Richard Stallman, almost single-handedly, but there were a bunch of us, that tried to keep the MIT fork up to date with sort of what this VC-funded thing was, and it almost killed Richard Stallman. And he's the most prodigious hacker I've ever gotten to work with. He could write flawless code at typing speed. It's just unbelievable. But he basically gave up, and he said, we're going to lose the Lisp machine because it was forked. That this wonderful operating system was going to be lost because it was forked, they were going to develop it, they were going to die, because all companies die, that's what they do, that's what they're for, is dying, but they die too late. But anyway, so they brought the Lisp machine down with them, and he said, okay, what we have as a problem here is this copyright stuff. So he basically said, okay, let's do this GNU public license, let's go back to some ridiculously awful operating system that we can go and work on, which would be Unix. And then basically started up that path. The culture, though, of MIT's hacking was go for it, do things, go play with stuff. I wanted to find out what the laws and how did people deal with courts of dealing with the Vietnam War. How do you get out of the Vietnam War draft? Well, MIT didn't have a legal library. Harvard did, but Harvard was locked. So, but I got my professor to give me his ID that didn't have a picture on it, and I broke into Harvard's law library to be able to learn how to deal with laws that were, but this sort of culture of doing that was actively encouraged. So Aaron's work, when he worked here on the Open Library project, but he did a bunch of things outside of the project. For instance, going and downloading the public domain books from the Google project and started uploading them to the Internet Archive, not as an employee, but as a pile of volunteers. Maybe some of you guys are here that helped with that, of going in parallel, going and getting around their technological measures, their public domain books, and uploading them to the Internet Archive. And we just started seeing these flooding in. And we said, well, who's that? What's going on? And, well, it's Aaron and his friends. And we said, great, let's go and get the metadata to be right. Let's go and give attribution to the libraries that it came from. Let's go and say thank you to Google and put links in back to them. And so we did this, and about 800,000 books came in, all working all great. And everybody was happy about it, as best I could tell, except Google kept trying to up the technological measures to make it more difficult for this type of public domain accessibility to happen. Pacer, public domain materials. There was an opening to go and have all you could eat at the Boston Public Library. He set up a laptop to download a lot of it, and he did. This was actually a call by Carl Malamud, who I think will be here tonight, to go and do something like this. But this got him in trouble. And these are the sorts of hacks that were actively encouraged in sort of the hacker idea and are not illegal. There's nothing that I've seen in working with Aaron and any of his projects where he had any inkling of going and making publicly accessible things that weren't public domain. So Internet Archive has lots of things that are not public domain that we make publicly accessible, but Aaron didn't do those. He was really very particular about the law and staying within it, but acting within a hacker community. So when MIT went and called the cops on somebody that was just writing a script to go and download to be able to do some data mining, this is really out of character. I tried to figure out who did that, and I called some of my friends that were still involved, and they said, not me, I didn't do that. And it started this whole grinding Kafka-esque world going forward of when you call the cops or the authorities on somebody, sometimes it's really out of your hands. I think that MIT could have played a much stronger role in trying to squash it. JSTOR certainly could have, but it was improper. So JSTOR, as best I can tell, went kind of nuts on MIT when it said, somebody's doing a lot of downloading. And they'd had issues in other universities going and downloading these things. Surprise, it's a really great data set. But they didn't want this to happen. They put pressure on MIT. MIT called the cops. That was really strange. MIT during my day did anything they could to keep the Cambridge cops off campus. Anything they could. The year before I got there, there'd been a major bust of acid production in one of the dorms, Bexley. And this acid was going everywhere in the Northeast. It was really, really good acid. And they traced it back to this dorm, and they busted the kid that was making it and distributing it. And MIT made a deal to get the kid off completely as long as they cleaned up the campus. And so by the time I got there, they made a show about trying to keep the smoke-ins kind of under control and stuff like that. But they did everything they could to try to keep the cops off. So I don't know quite what the circumstances were that JSTOR got MIT to act out of character, if MIT has changed character, and why didn't sort of really actively work to squash this. There's other things that I learned. I'm babbling on about this.
All right, keep
but
going.
there were some problems in this particular case that the feds came down so hard on Aaron that they basically traced and wanted to basically intimidate anybody that he was associated with him. So they tried to make it so they didn't talk to anybody about this. And so I think he felt very isolated. There were a lot of people that all through Aaron's career helped him out. He was a wonderkin of our generation. And so there are a lot of people helping out, and he felt that he couldn't reach out, and I think it made him feel much more isolated. That's another real problem as part of the whole court system. Once there's this Kafkaesque thing starts to go with cases, it's a real problem. The key thing is stay out of court, and please don't jump to the conclusion that you should call the authorities on anybody else. It's a very heavy, blunt hammer that doesn't work very well, even in best of circumstances. And we get people crushed by them. And Aaron, of course, is one. So the MIT ethos was not followed through. What Aaron was doing by doing mechanical download is something that we actively encourage people to do on the Internet Archive. And people have APIs to make happen, and they actively do it. The idea that there was some hacker here that had to be crushed, I think was a Kafkaesque thing by some very overzealous prosecutors, and MIT and JSTOR did not come to his defense to go and try to say, this isn't the guy that you're thinking of. Go after somebody else. That didn't happen, and it ended very badly.
Gabriella, I see you
Well,
jotting down all your notes.
Yeah, no, it was extremely interesting because you were there part of the sort of birth of this hacker ethos at MIT, and I'm much more of an outsider who is an anthropologist who kind of studies the different worlds of hacking. And I think what I want to do is just kind of complement some of the issues that you raised around Aaron Swartz and his persecution in lots of ways, because I think what you've put on the table is that on the one hand, there's just so much clarity around the fact that what he had done was not illegal, right? And yet, the response by MIT, JSTOR, the police became Kafkaesque and was very aggressive. And in some ways, I think it's always going to remain a little bit of a puzzle why you had that disjuncture. But I think that there's one interesting explanation that I'd like to explore just a little bit. So on the one hand, by the time Aaron Swartz was intervening in the world politically, technologically, the term hacker, of course, had taken on many meanings. At the time that you were at MIT, there was a kind of innocence around the term hacker. There weren't any sort of dark and bad associations. In the 80s and 90s, it kind of amassed those types of associations. But actually, I think in the 2000s, what was interesting was that on the one hand, you still had a lot of negative associations around hackers as kind of pure criminal activity. But because of the role of hacktivists, whistleblowers leaking, the role of the open source movement, there had kind of been a rehabilitation around the term. So there were many different associations. It wasn't always something negative. And so with someone like Aaron Swartz, what I find so interesting about him is that I think he was such a threat precisely because he was such a difficult figure to demonize. Precisely because he wasn't doing anything illegal, precisely because he had the respect of so many people in different quarters of the technological world, from academia, from the hacker world, industry, right? He was a really respected figure. So in some respects, when he acted, when he published a statement about opening information, when he contributed to Creative Commons, people listened in a way that when you have something like Anonymous, which is another kind of domain I've worked on, they inherently are controversial the very moment they appear. And so it's quite easy in some ways to back them into a demonic corner, whereas with Aaron, that was very, very difficult thing to do. And this is why I think the Pacer incident is so interesting and fascinating in many ways, because precisely when Carl Malmud had sort of made the call to ask people to start downloading these documents from the 17 libraries where they were made available, this was perfectly legal to do. It was just very, very clever. And so Aaron, with the help of others, precisely started to download some of this material. It received tremendous publicity as well. And in many respects, I think that threats, that the threatening part was precisely doing something that could stay within the bounds of the law, publicize something that a lot of people believed in, which is court records should be publicly available for free or very, very, very low cost. And this is when I think the FBI became interested in him, precisely because he had the type of reputation and standing to change people's hearts and minds.
Yes, and I think it was rather serendipitous too. When he did the Pacer hack, the way the system was set up, it was roughly one library every 22,000 square miles or something, and he just happened to hear about it and then know somebody within the range of close enough to one of these libraries, and sort of went off in the corner where he was and did some work that day, and it all sort of came together in that serendipitous way. And in a way, he was being creative, like a hacker, with these very ridiculous confines that he was given for obtaining these public domain materials, and he just found a way to do it. And so the FBI got mad, we think. They were driving up and down the driveway by his parents' house and making their presence known. I always think about it. They kind of have to make they don't have to make their presence known when they're surveying people. They could do it in a way that they don't know about it. So for me, it's always that kind of little extra rub when they want the parents to know that they're watching or that kind of thing. And that was definitely going on. That's covered in the Aaron Swartz movie. If you haven't seen it, The Internet's Own Boy.
Can you understand her?
Can you hear me? Okay, just making sure. You can't hear me?
Go.
Okay. So The Internet's Own Boy covers this really well, and I actually have that clip that I meant to put up by now, but I will be putting it up because it really covers the nuts and bolts of I like to call it the Pacer download experiment, and the nuts and bolts of how it works. And the thing that we're figuring out, because Carl had a theory about that there was a new legal person at MIT that sort of like that's why they went right to the cops instead of handling it more internally and stuff like that. But that story didn't actually check out with the people that I talked to who thought, no, there wasn't anything unusual like that at the time. It was just that they were waiting. It was like when they followed him that night and pushed him off his bike and beat him up, that was supposed to be a Secret Service operation. He was already in the crosshairs before this happened. That's the part that I think we have to kind of remember. So they were waiting for him to do something. And again, at face value, even we found out later that he hadn't actually done anything illegal because of these agreements that were made and things like that. I guess at face value, it looked like he had maybe finally crossed the line and downloaded some copyright stuff or something. Who knows what an overzealous agent might try to turn this into. But that's all just, hypothesizing from the things that I've been able to figure out about, and also from a few personal experiences where you feel like you have this big heavy thing that you don't want to talk to anyone about, and you just sort of reach out a little less about everything. You just don't want to, you maybe don't go to that family event or something, you just really don't want to, you're worried about getting other people involved in whatever it is, because you kind of don't know what it is. It's just something weird and creepy and you don't know what it is. And so if this was going on with Aaron for 1 year, 2 years, I can start to understand how he could have gotten isolated and maybe gotten to, it's still hard for us to understand how he could have been that depressed, because everybody that knew him is in agreement that he really wasn't a depressed guy. He wasn't one of these hackers. He wasn't one of these sort of Mr. Robot hoodie guys that's pouting all the time and, banging his head against the wall when nobody's looking. That wasn't Aaron. He wasn't like that. And somebody heard another story about somebody who saw him just the month before it happened, and he seemed in a very good place, seemed very happy. So it was definitely sort of like things closed in and got bad all at once, or again, we don't know what led up. But it was really bad timing, man, because his lawyers had just made a bunch of breakthroughs and some evidence they were trying to put together, and things were starting to look good. Alex Stamos was putting his expert testimony together, and he really thought they were going to go in there and talk about freedom and make the government look silly for this. That's what they thought they were going to do. They were just starting to think they were going to do, but I guess nobody had conveyed this to Aaron yet. Like, seriously, they were just about to call him with some information of some stuff that happened 2 days before when this happened. And so he didn't know that things were starting to look a little better yet, is the story that I heard. And so it was just really a horrible sequence of timing. Yeah. So I think we want to...
So I'd like to not leave with lead with a real message that open access is going to get you into the crosshairs and have a lot of problems. I think I'm not exactly sure why they try to pick on Aaron. These are good theories, but there are lots and lots of us that have been working in this area for a very, very long time. And the whole free software movement started by Richard Stallman, which is a brilliant hack on the legal system to build a bubble within an oppressive regime, which is the copyright regime, where you have voluntary admission into a bubble that works better, and it's changed how our whole field works. But at that time, in the 80s when that was coming out, Microsoft just, I'd love to get the real quotations, but it was more or less, capitalism is going to end. It's all over because of Richard Stallman's free software license. I mean, it was there's sort of this dramatic sort of, oh my God, you've got to stop this sort of thing. And, you know, obviously it's wrong. And Microsoft is now a major proponent of open source software and free software. So a lot of these changes meet with resistance. But going through things where you're kind of open about what you're trying to do and not just poking people in the eye actually works fairly well. Demonstrate that your service works better. And I think that's what Aaron did in general. He was quite visible about what he did, but I don't think of it as being obnoxious and how he did it. I think the Internet Archive basically is this kind of role of going and making permanent public access to materials. We're open and straightforward about what we're trying to do. We have open forums about what we're trying to do, and we just try to move through it and help people realize that this technology isn't necessarily their enemy. So I think that that is the rule that generally plays out, and basically I think it's Aaron got sort of caught up in some of this. One thing that Aaron did from my perspective that was fascinating is I think he led an open source life. He was a very prominent blogger from the very early days of blogging, and he just decided to make his everything public about what it is he did. And that was really pretty amazing. And a lot of people read his stuff, and a lot of people were inspired by his thinking and the development of this young man. I have this photograph of us with the bookmobile in front of the Supreme Court when Larry Lessig was arguing that the copyright shouldn't be extended for yet another 20 years. We had a bookmobile. It's 2002, and there was this young little Aaron Swartz there. I don't know, it was maybe 14, 15, 16, I don't know, 14 at that time, but he was there. And he was just trying to understand what the world was and live an open life. And I'd say in some ways he was crushed by it, which is a shame. But the lesson out of this is don't always live in fear. That I think you have more friends than you know. That there's more people that will help that you know. If you're doing something where if your mission is pure, that does for a lot as you try to wiggle through and try to get some of these open practices done. So, and I just don't want to be such a downer on Aaron Swartz. I think it's an upper. He basically had an effect that was really outsized what a young man should ever have accomplished at that time, or ever could have accomplished in many other generations. And it was enabled and empowered by the technology, but also by communities that he touched, that really felt invigorated and helped by the work that he did.
Yes, and I think also it's sort of the, since Aaron's strategy of not telling any of his friends what was wrong obviously did not work, was a bad thing. I try to make the point of people to talk to people. I'm not saying tell everybody willy-nilly what's going on. I'm saying think about the people that you have in your circle that might be able to help. Maybe you know somebody at the EFF, maybe you know somebody at the Freedom of the Press Foundation, or somebody that knows somebody from one of those organizations. And it doesn't have to be the person in that organization that you'll be actually talking to. It can be somebody else that's going to find the person that you need to talk to. And, but you need to find the right person to talk to, because when it comes to this whistleblowing stuff, you really have to find another way to do it. Find a way to get the information out. Sorry. It's important when you know you have some information and it has to get out, and it doesn't seem to be getting out any other way, okay? I know that feeling, and you are probably right. And I'm not saying not to do anything. I'm saying don't just do the whistleblowing thing, even with Secure Drop right off the bat, without thinking about your other options, because it is fucked, okay? You're all by yourself. Nobody could help you if they wanted to. They really don't. They try for a while and then they forget about it because it's just too hard. Okay? And sometimes, a lot of these whistleblowers, I'm not going to name names, but sometimes it wasn't that big a deal what they released. And now they're going to prison, and for what? Okay? So talk to somebody that knows what the hell's going on, figure it out, have somebody write me, and I'll tell them who to talk to. I don't care. I never get personally involved in any of this stuff ever again, I'll tell you that much. But I'll definitely always help someone in trying to find the right person so that they can find the right way to get the information to the right person even. Maybe it's not the best thing to just throw it up there and see if anybody cares. Maybe there's a special person who could actually act on that information. Maybe they're going to act on it quietly, getting things done in the background. Okay, the bad guys don't even know it's out, all right? And you could get more done that way with a little more forethought. So it's not just that you don't want to throw your life away and go to prison and die. Not just that. But that you could actually maybe get more done faster if you just take a little time to think about it. So I, for one, was the Secure Drop cheerleader a couple years ago. I'm still making my movie, but it's going to be a little different now. I'm more of a historical and a factual representation of what's going on and talking about how to deal with these issues and get things done and not just, yay team, let's all blow the whistle and worry about it later, because later can be bad, very bad. Okay, but hey, I didn't want to end on a bad note, but we started late, so I wasn't worried about that. I did want to say one more thing about what Brewster was talking about and about what Aaron and what might have put in the crosshairs, because Jason Leopold is here to talk about the FOIA requests that Aaron was filing, many, many FOIA requests. And it's actually not the ones you think that may have been kind of triggering things, but he was doing a lot of different legal things that was drawing the government's attention. And when I started to go back and look, there was really a lot of different things, but all of them combined is going to make this guy they would just be a real pain in the ass as far as they were concerned, somebody that needed to be neutralized as soon as possible. So maybe they were waiting for their chance. And then there's just all the different hypotheses that I said before. So Jason is going to shed some light on this FOIA stuff. We're doing a lot of work at this hackathon with public records requests and automating the process. Daniel Rigmaiden is here, who exposed the stingray from prison, and it turns out that he was filing public records requests from prison, and he has a lot of extra surveillance manuals lying around when he was getting his stingray patent filings and things like that around, and we're putting a lot of this information together so that we can proactively approach cities about their surveillance equipment. And so that's why the FOIA kind of ties back into the ethical algorithms that we're about to start, the police predictive software, the Minority Report with bad software, I like to call it. And these things are all intertwined, and damn, Aaron's projects are all over the place in between them. So I actually managed to get them all here this weekend, and that's why I know it seems like a range of different topics, but they actually are very related this year, as you'll see as the day goes on. So we're going to take 5 minutes and get the next panel set up. Okay, and we're going to talk about ethical algorithms with Kristen Lum from HRDAG and Caroline Sinders from the Wikimedia Foundation and Chelsea Manning. We'll be right back. Thanks.
Hey, hi. I can hear that. Oh, there we go.
Oh, yeah.
Test.
No, it's not on. Now it's on.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Hey, everybody, thanks a lot for coming back. Where's the webcast? Boop. Okay. So thanks a lot for coming to Aaron Swartz Day. We're about to start our ethical algorithms panel, and I'm really excited that we have everybody here. This is like this dream panel that we had hypothesized, like maybe we could do it. Chelsea and I have been talking about this issue pretty much since the first day we started talking on the phone, and it was really nice to be able to integrate it, or kind of integrated itself this year into the program. Today, I just want to introduce our speakers here. We have Kristen Lum from Human Rights Data Analysis Group, and she's the lead statistician there, and they have an algorithm for determining basically who the casualties really are after like a genocide or a war or something, usually after something bad has happened, and being able to figure out who those people are. Their tagline is "Everybody Counts," and it's really amazing work that they do now, and they're really in a class by themselves. So I really wanted someone from there to be on this panel. So thanks a lot, Christian. Caroline Senders used to be on the IBM chat team. Chatbot team, and she actually made chatbots for making chatbots, right?
I helped design the software so people could create their own chatbots.
Okay, right. And then of course we have Chelsea, and Chelsea is an artificial intelligence expert and into algorithms, and we always chuckle when we say that, but it's true, and I'm really happy that she decided to be a part of the panel. I wasn't sure if she was going to be able to be here personally, so I'm really happy that she's here. So without any further ado, I'm going to let Kristen Lum start things off and talk about this police predictive software that's really frightening, that is being used in Chicago is the use case that I've been reading the most about, but we're finding out that it's being used in different places. And this actually ties into there's a police surveillance project on the website where I'm trying to get everybody here to start filing these public information requests. It turns out we get to play a guessing game when we want to find out what surveillance equipment has already been purchased by our state and local governments. And we get to file a public information request and guess at all the surveillance equipment that they might have purchased. And if we get it right, then they're supposed to give us those records about it. And then we might be able to put pressure on our local governments to do something about it and put a policy in place based on the existence of the surveillance equipment. And of course, my first question was, wait a minute, the stuff that's already in place. So yeah, so all the departments are just buying this stuff willy-nilly and doing what they want with it because there's no policies in place about how they're using it. So this police predictive software is being used however they want to use it because there isn't any policy in place in terms of oversight. So again, I just wanted to tie it all together in terms of something that you can do if you want to take part into trying to change some of this stuff after you find out about it. So I'm going to let Christian take it away telling us about this software.
Okay, yeah, so, right, so predictive policing. How many people here, is anyone familiar with this already? Okay, great, actually most people are here. That's fantastic. Yeah, so usually what this does is it's software that's used to predict either who will commit a crime in the future or where a crime will occur in the future, and in some limited cases, like I think one of the cases that Lisa was talking about in Chicago, also maybe who will be a victim of a crime in the future. So a few different versions of this, right? Individual type predictions as well as location type predictions. And what I focused on in the past more has to do with the location-based predictions, and so I'll talk a little bit about that more, but we can talk about some of the individual level predictions as well if you'd like. So how the location-based software tends to work is it takes past information that the police have about where not drug crimes, excuse me, I'll get to that in a second, where crimes have occurred. So it will be information like things that have been reported to police, and things that police have found when they're patrolling, right? So they have all these incident reports. So then that gets plugged into an algorithm which learns patterns in the data. So it's just a machine learning algorithm. There are many different versions of this. Some of them have, I'm sure some of them are doing deep learning. Some of them are, simpler models, like the one that I've looked at most carefully is a machine learning type model that's used for earthquake prediction. But so you'll take this data and you'll plug it into any number of these different types of models. And what that machine learning model will do, because this is what machine learning models do, right, is learn patterns in the data that they are given. Not something more broadly, they specifically are learning patterns in the data that they're given, and then based on the patterns that they learn from that data, make predictions. So in the predictive policing context, the police records are fed into the algorithm learns patterns in the police data, and then it makes predictions about where police should be deployed in the future. And in some cases, then the police will be deployed to those locations. So it might say go to, tomorrow, this spot right here on this corner is likely to be a high crime area, and you should go there. And then additional police forces will be deployed to that area. All right. And so as I see it, there are several issues involved in this. First of all, I think one of the main issues is that the whole premise of doing this, or at least, one of the premises of doing this is that the criminal justice system and policing in general is kind of busted, right? There are certain people who are more likely than others for the same level of criminality to end up as a record in the police records, either because the community is more likely to report them or because the police are more likely to surveil them. And so the data set that's being fed into the algorithm isn't a representative sample of crime, but rather it embeds the biases of both society and the biases of the police. And so if the idea is we want to then use algorithms, apply it to this data under the pretense that this is going to make something that's extremely objective, well, that's just crazy, because we're taking data that's encoding societies and the police's biases, learning those biases and making predictions that reinforce and perpetuate those same biases. So I think that's really, that's really the heart of this issue. And so what I did in a recent short write-up, not recent anymore actually, I guess it was late 2015, man, time goes by fast, was I found this, this academic article where one of the companies that makes this software had actually outlined the algorithm that they use to do the predictions. I think this might be a little bit of a pared down version relative to what they're selling, but in any case, it's something that they had deployed in the real world. And I applied it to a data set of all of the police records of drug crimes in Oakland, excuse me. And I wanted, and I think to a lot of people who are really involved in machine learning, it's pretty obvious that what's going to happen is it's going to reproduce those patterns, right? But really the marketing material makes it seem like it's going to be this super objective thing. It's going to tell you something brand new you've never thought of before. And so really the point of this was to see if we were to apply this real predictive policing algorithm to a data set of the police records of drug crimes in Oakland, where would it send the police? All right, so we looked at the Oakland police data from openoakland.org. They had done a lot of work to sort of compile and process this data ahead of time. And we said, okay, they're basically that, most of the drug incident reports are taking place in West Oakland and along International Boulevard or Fruitvale area. I'm not super familiar with Oakland, but I think, I've looked into the demographic characteristics of those areas. So it was primarily a black neighborhood and a Hispanic neighborhood. That's where most of these drug crime incident reports were in the police database. I ran the predictive policing software that I had reproduced from the paper on that data set, and lo and behold, we found that if this predictive policing algorithm were used to predict drug crimes in Oakland, it would almost uniformly send the police only to the African American community and the Hispanic community. That was it. And so I mean, this shouldn't be extraordinarily surprising if you see the training data that goes into it, but I really think it is impactful to be able to see, oh man, where would the police be going if we were to use this type of software to allocate their deployments? And so the other piece of this that I think is important is then we looked at drug use rates by race from a different source, which is public health data, just to see, okay, is this reflecting some legitimate difference in the rates of drug use in society that maybe, I mean, I didn't actually think this, but maybe there's some way to justify this. And in fact, there isn't. If you look at the public health data, it really seems to be the case that no matter how you divide people up by racial classification, people tend to use drugs at roughly the same rate. So you can't really attribute it likely to differences in the true rate of drug use, right? And so what's going on, again, just to summarize quickly, what's going on is, in my opinion, there had been historical over-policing of those communities. That policing had been encoded in the police's own data, of course, and then as you apply an algorithm to that data, make predictions based on that data, then you perpetuate that bias from the past. And so that's the deal with predictive policing in my mind.
Great, thank you. Chelsea, you look like you're getting ready to say something. Did you have something you want to say? No, okay.
No, I'm just listening.
Okay, cool. All right, so so before we move on real quick, so what do you see as a solution to this? Where do we go from here?
Is this for me?
Yes.
Well, so I think there's really this tendency to think the solution is better algorithms. Maybe if we could predict this thing we're trying to predict better, that'll solve the problem. But actually, I don't think that's the solution. I think one of the things you're talking about, getting more information about what types of algorithms are used, so people can really stress test them, so the public can be aware of which, if there are, say, racially disparate rates of targeted policing in their communities, they should be able to know that.
I mean, does he think it helps any to show that that it's giving the cops bad data? I mean, we've been saying that for a long time. How do you think we really, because that's what they'll say, right? They'll say, oh, we're going to fix it. We're going to make it better. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And the better algorithm question is actually something that's a good segue for Caroline, because Caroline.
Yes.
Well, yeah,
are we just going to be able to fix this with better algorithms?
No, certainly not going to be able to fix it with better algorithms.
Oh, I didn't think you were saying that.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, God, no. Sorry.
If we had better data, I think, if our data didn't encode, inequities of the past, then I think this would be more successful. But getting better data is as difficult as creating a fair society.
Do you think there's a way to get better data?
I mean, it's also kind of worth pointing out that sometimes being not included in the data is also a way to have safety and protection, right? What does it mean to be a data point when data sets are human data? When we're looking at population data or any kind of data dealing with people, it's always important to bring up the privacy aspects of this. There's a great artist, Mimi Onawa, whose work is all around missing data sets, and one of the things she often points out is sometimes being a missing data set also means you have a lot of protection of not being seen. AI Now Institute, run by Meredith Whitaker and Kate Crawford, just released 10 recommendations of ways that companies and different bureaucratic systems can start thinking about algorithms. And one of them is just no more black box algorithms, right? I think there's a lot of obfuscation around, even when you have an algorithm that's good, how do you have transparency around that? We don't have a rating system from algorithms. We don't know the data that went into just training the algorithm first, right? We can take an algorithm and then apply another data set to it, and that's what you did, and replicate those results. But I think there's also so many questions around, okay, well, how was this algorithm trained and who made it? And what was it designed to highlight or pick out, or how was it designed to run? And there's a lot of still deep unanswered questions inside that. They are black boxes of mystery, really.
Yeah, and I think sorry, do you mind if I say that? Another aspect I think of this whole transparency or no black boxing is having more transparency surrounding the provenance of the data sets, not only a sort of narrative description of how they are collected, in the case of the police data, but also a description of what sort of pre-processing takes place on those data sets. In sort of going back to the criminal justice setting, there are a lot of models that are now predicting whether whether an individual will be rearrested in the future. Now here's the question, what counts as a rearrest, right? That's sort of a pre-processing question. You have all this information, say somebody fails to appear for court, then there's a bench warrant issued and then they're arrested. Should that count? And then if you were to make that data available, and again, there are privacy issues surrounding that, but that's a very consequential decision that you're making which types of arrests you're going to count towards your prediction for rearrest. And so I don't see a whole lot of conversation about this sort of data munging, because it's not that glamorous, right? It's this real back-end stuff, but I actually think that's one of the most those are some of the most consequential decisions that are made in developing these algorithms, and even in the conversation surrounding transparency, that's often a little bit lost.
Well, I also feel like we group data and algorithms into one thing when they're parts of an equation that can also be two totally separate branches that are also worth alone isolating, looking at, and then looking at them together. It's like data, algorithms, data plus algorithms.
Well, so I mean, just a little background here. So I've worked with these algorithms before, and I've worked with these algorithms in the military context. So we used, I in particular used we used statistical predictive analysis in order to make predictions based upon data that we would feed the algorithms from previous data, and then make predictions as to where the hot spotting essentially. Technique that's used in the same technique that's used in predictive policing, but to actually use it to move forces into a particular neighborhood, to patrol more in a particular neighborhood, to be on the lookout for more things. And so I would see these free feedback loops and things based on and I think, and to go with what we're talking about specifically, I think that the pre-processing that we were using and that I was playing around with, I would come up with a prediction, and it would be a fairly good prediction sometimes, at least from a statistical perspective. I mean, not based on the data, but I would have no idea where that came from, even though I was the one who wrote it. Right, and I was the one who was working with it. So, it's not just that there's that it's a black box to everybody else, but even whenever your code is available to you, sometimes how it's actually coming up with the predictions it's coming up with, apart from just doing pure math. I mean, when you're trying to come up with something that's understood by humans for an explanation, it can escape you sometimes. So I think that's one of the dangers of having, of depending on just showing the entire, algorithm. We have to fully understand these algorithms and not just see how they work from a code perspective or from an algorithmic perspective.
Totally, but this is also where I think too, being an ethnographer of your data is so important, and looking at a data set as a subculture of an ecosystem. And this happened a lot with a lot of the work I'd be doing at IBM Watson, where we would be tasked with being given a data set and then being given an algorithm, and then part of my job was also often to create public demos, so demos that the public could access and interact with. And the first thing that I would often do is sit with a data scientist and try to investigate what is in the data set first, because we were often getting a complete data set. We weren't using this week's Twitter data for top hashtags. Sometimes it was here's the Enron email data set. It's closed, it's done, here you go. And I think it's so important to highlight if you can take the time to figure out what are the anomalies already inside of your data, as opposed to assuming that there's this neutrality inside the algorithm you're using, that the code you're using is neutral, and then thus the results that are being returned are canonical or perfect results, or the results you should be relying on. If you don't understand the aspects of the data you're working with, oftentimes that is, if you understand the data you're working with and sort of the nuances of the data you're working with, that can often explain why the results are what they are. And I think your example pointed that out really well. If you look at over-policing, it's not a surprise that when you run policing data or population data, or over-policing of black neighborhoods, it's not a surprise, and a predictive policing model and algorithm would then take that data and then suggest over-policing that by already acknowledging that the data set is flawed, but you have to know that the data set is flawed, you knew what was in the data set.
Yeah, and I think that this idea that we really need to know the nuances of the data is even important all the way through the process when we start talking about model validation. So we keep, you'll hear a lot about, oh, is your model validated, or what's the predictive accuracy of the model? And again, the context I work in is these criminal justice type models, so that's usually what I'm thinking of when I'm talking about these things. But, they'll report something like predictive accuracy. We got this many number of predictions about whether this person will be rearrested correct. okay, if you don't understand the nuance of the data that arrest is not an objective measure of criminality, what does that even mean to say that you got something right? If you're trying to predict criminality and you're predicting arrest correctly, well, great, maybe you can make a perfect machine learning model. I mean, you can't, but like maybe you had enough information, maybe you could, even if we posited that you could, and you could get every prediction of whether someone would be rearrested right, that model's not going to disentangle the two effects of this person is more likely to be rearrested because they're more likely to engage in more criminal behavior from this person's more likely to be rearrested because they're more likely to be surveilled by police.
Yeah.
Right, and so understanding the nuance of the data even can help you at that later stage of the process when you're thinking carefully about, oh, I've gotten 100% accuracy, right? This is the best model ever. Right. You have to think to yourself, well, you know, congratulations, but what am I even predicting?
Right. Yeah. Well, what scares me with that is like how some of these algorithms are actually being used in like bail hearings.
Yeah.
You know, they're like oh, you're predicted more to have. You're predicted by this algorithm that's and no, and I think we need to like. People in technology need to acknowledge that no data set is unbiased and that no algorithm is unbiased, and you can never, like, you can get better, but you just can't get there. And also, like you're literally changing this person's life, because they're going to stay in jail because they're in a bail hearing because some algorithm that was made by some company decided that you're more predicted to be arrested, and like it's not evidentiary in any way, but it's being used in an evidentiary manner because it's just a mathematical prediction that's based on false data or poor data, and it's actually tearing people's lives apart. And it's also feeding back into this feedback loop where because they're seen as being more rearrestable, therefore it reinforces the data set.
Totally. And this is something where, I think like the investigative reporting that ProPublica has done specifically on this is really worth highlighting. And another example is, have you heard of Faceception? It's this Israeli company that's it's using facial recognition software inside of surveillance cameras to like rate different emotions in your face. But if you look at their demo, it's the brown man frowning that's clearly like the angry person most likely to engage in a crime. But then what I find fascinating is even if you move outside of like obviously the very awful and real racial implications of that, who determines like what safety looks like or what is a neutral face? And if you think about it from a cultural perspective of, how many people have resting bitch face, for example, but are having a really great time? Or if you want an even more serious result, how many people have been in really compromised situations where their safety is at risk and they have to look like they're smiling or maintain a very happy and neutral face? Like this kind of surveillance that exists as a way to like help or look at or divide up our everyday emotions forgets that like we are not allowed to be ourselves 100% of the time. And it also really misconstrues as to what is safety and what is danger based off if you're a marginalized person, a person of color, non-gender binary, like trans, female, etc. It assumes that we all experience like safety in the same way. Even going beyond obviously that this is a flawed method to try to find what a terrorist is.
Yeah. And to like one of the best examples that I've ever seen for how flawed that the algorithms that we are using are is whenever you actually do feed the algorithms with training data that's skewed in a different direction. I think that for New York City, like I remember there was I forgot who did it, but and somebody might be able to find it for me, but there was somebody fed all of the white collar crime data into the system, and it showed the financial district as being the hot spot where the police should probably start going to.
The new inquiry did that. That was I really loved that project. It was really amazing.
That was hilarious. I think they also had a piece of that where they then scraped like LinkedIn profiles and made a composite face of someone.
And it's just a white man.
Now what program? I just want to know what project is this now, so people can look it up.
It's the new inquiry white collar crime predictor.
Yes.
It was made by Sam Levine, Brian Clifton, and Francis Singh.
Okay.
And I think it was a bit tongue in cheek. It wasn't.
Is it accurate? Is it done with real data?
It's technically accurate. They wrote a white paper, I think, that has been accepted to different conferences. And like there are 3 data scientists that worked on it, but it was also done as a tongue-in-cheek joke, but to look at like it's done in the way that you can verify in the way in which these other kinds of predictive algorithms are also verifiable. So it is up to like a specific kind of standard, and it has been accepted to different conferences.
Yeah.
Like, and they've been able to reproduce their results multiple times.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's, could you talk a little bit about this verifiable data model? And is that an easy way to tell right away if we just shouldn't even pay attention to some study or something because it hasn't used one?
I feel less knowledgeable on verifiability of data sets and data models and algorithms from an academic standpoint. But from like an industry standpoint, often those are not the questions I find people asking in a conference room or in a conference call of, well, like, how sure are we that it's true? It's more, we've gotten these results and people have purchased this much of it, or, you know, it's selling really well. Because we're in the age of people building software as a capability, software as a product, APIs as a product, meaning like you buy access to an API that's like a pipeline. And if it's returning certain results that a company can then use and put into a portfolio to sell to other different kinds of clients, like, it doesn't actually really matter how much it works if it has the appearance of working, if it's pumping out results. So I can't speak to like academic verifiability of different kinds of APIs. I can speak to that I have not ever heard people really talk about that.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to clarify, so it is an important thing that there is a verifiable data model, and it is not always done.
Totally. But then oftentimes you have to ask, like, what are the questions even that are being used as like the methods of verifying what you're looking at? Like, what are those questions, right? And this is where I think it's like academia is so important, because this can be debated in the academy, this can be debated in different academic spaces and institutions. People write responses to papers and other papers. And this happens all the time. I think there is a big push, though, for if you work in industry software to really understand like the ethical ramifications of the products you're using, or like the software that you're using, and how it affects your users, and how this affects even like unintended bystanders, people that have not opted into the system or into the product, right? And that's where you get into like different surveillance systems or different systems that are like in the whole vein of like the Internet of Things, right? How many people are accidentally a part of a data set that they didn't get to opt into?
And so I think when, you know, lay people, for example, want to talk about whether your data is reliable or verifiable or whatever, or accurate, I don't think they're often thinking about it in the same way that I do, which would be representative. Like in the crime example, did everyone who, say, committed a crime have the same chance of ending up in that data? I think it often is more in the context of, if this person's age was listed as age 25 and his, you know, date of birth was whatever would correspond to 25 years ago, was that recorded accurately, right? Was the geotag recorded accurately? Was the circumstances surrounding why the officer was there recorded accurately? And in many cases, you know, that can all be correct. I think when people think about this sort of reliability, or, you know, going and verifying each record, those details can all be right. Each record can be completely accurate, but that's not to say that the data set as a whole is accurate from the standpoint of representativity, right?
Totally.
The standpoint of everybody who, and I'm using this word very loosely, should have been in the data set actually is.
Or is a company even using the algorithm in the way that it was intended to be used? Like how many times do people or companies purchase an algorithm that's designed for one kind of analytics and they're using it for a completely different thing, right? Like, and then you get these completely skewed results.
Absolutely, yeah.
And as long as they like the results,
Yeah,
no harm, no foul kind of thing?
Yeah, I've had experience with this in particular in my own experience, but like for verifiability of data, like, you know, it's purely academic. And that's what I found, is that, you know, like when you're working in like a corporate or, you know, a business setting, or whether you're working in a government setting or a military context or whatever, like the results. Like it is not based on that. Nobody cares how verifiable the data is. Everybody's cutting corners. Everybody's trying to meet deadlines, and you know that's why we as people in technology, that's why we need to be thinking more ethically. Why we need to like be very cognizant of the systems that we're building, and not just sitting there continually meeting deadlines and like meeting, you know, priorities that are set by our leadership, or, you know, by clients, or by, you know, like by senior corporate, you know, like C-suite people. Like, you really need to like think like what you're doing, what the consequences of what you're doing are, because these are not questions that are happening, and they should be happening. And in many cases, for some of these systems, maybe even the question of whether we should even be doing a system like this at all, is a very it's a question that should be at least asked, in some of these rooms.
Totally.
It's not.
I mean,
but it's not going to be. And from a political perspective, you have to also view a lot of this stuff from a political perspective. Some of the leadership and some of the people and some of the politicians and some of the like more politically oriented senior personnel that you have in institutions, they don't care. They know it's you can tell them it's messed up. You can tell them the data's skewed. They don't care as long as it fits within the results and they still have their job or they get reelected. Like, they don't care as long as the data is churning out results. So there's an incentive part where their incentive is not to create algorithms that are better, for everybody, or it is to enforce rules and laws and like systems that benefit them over somebody else.
In some cases, I think act as a bit of a sponge for accountability, because now if you have this system, say that you've purchased or that's been created by peer-reviewed science or whatever, very expensive technology, and it's telling you to do the thing you wanted to do anyway. Well, now I think it's, you have something to point to and say, oh, we're, say, over-policing this community, but hey, the software that we've spent all this money on is telling us to do it. And so I think it can act as a little bit of a buffer between being able to question, like, well, why are you doing that, right?
Yeah, I've actually had this happen. So as an analyst in Iraq, I would often come up with predictions, but like it was like I was noticing the feedback loops, and I was being I was very consciously dissecting some of the results that I was getting to like understand where it's coming from. And so one of the things that I realized was that we're creating like violence in certain neighborhoods. We're actually perpetuating we're causing the spiral by actually, because we're going into a particular neighborhood that is hot spotted, we will then go in there, because we would look at our data as well, at what we would do, and then we would be able to predict more activity based on our own actions within a particular neighborhood. And when I brought this up, I tried to explain this to the leadership at one point, and I basically said, so this is what it predicts that we're going to do, and what the results of that are going to be. And the leader, this particular person actually just said, so the algorithm agrees with me. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. It was how they interpreted the data of the prediction as not being a prediction, a mathematical prediction based upon previous data, but as a recommendation.
Totally. I had something similar at a place I used to work at where we were given a data set, the Enron emails, and like an algorithm we had just purchased, which did social media analytics. And they were like, just make us a demo. And I was like, well, first of all, Enron emails are way different than social media data. They have all these different kinds of metrics, like whatever this algorithm is using. It's also designed to be used with data that's in constant churning. Like, it's designed to be used right now. Anyway, make them a demo. A lot of it required figuring out what was inside the Enron email data set. And then our sales team was like, oh, great, so what this is a compliance tool. And I was like, this is absolutely not a compliance tool at all. And it was a 20-minute conversation of being like, let me explain to you how we, using design, made this demo live, and two, the ethical problems of assuming that because you can run any kind of algorithm on top of something and you get a result, that you could sell this as a compliance tool. Why would you do that to people? But it was just this really fascinating conversation, because it was just trying to explain data science 101 and ethics 101 of computer science to just a bunch of blank faces. And but it gave us these results. And it's right, but you already have an idea as to what is in the Enron email data set, because it's Enron and the assumption is there's bad stuff. But we don't know that that's happening at any other space, at any other company for other people. We have no idea how this would interact out in the wild. You absolutely in good faith cannot sell this in this way.
So that's what I'm hearing too. I'm hearing that they're basically, the software companies that are making a lot of this stuff, talk about ethics, they're basically selling it to whomever they can for whatever they can apply it to, or whatever someone wants to interpret that it can be. I just want to ask one more thing, and then we're going to open it up to questions too. I want to let people know, hold your hand up, and I'll run over with the mic. So what do you think we can do for these people? I mean, to stop these people. They're powerful, their companies are getting bigger, no one seems to care that they're selling snake oil as long as the money's coming in.
Yeah, me personally, I think that we in technology have a responsibility to make our own decisions in the workplace, wherever that may be, and to communicate with each other, share notes, talk to each other, and like really think about what take a moment, think about what you're doing. What are you doing? What is, like, are you helping? Are you harming things? Like, is this worth it? You know, is this what you really want to be doing? Are deadlines being prioritized over, you know, are results being prioritized over good, you know, results? Should we do something? And, you know, I certainly made a decision in my own life, you know, to do something, and it's going to be different for every person. But, you know, like, you really need to make your own decision as to what to do, and you don't have to act individually. We can work as a community. We can work as a collective entity. Like, people in technology, we're not going to be able to explain to people, you know, all this stuff, because, like, people know everything's messed up, and they know that things are messed up because of the algorithms that we have. We've educated them on that. They understand that. They understand that viscerally because they see it. They see the consequences and the results of what these things are happening every day. The problem is that people in technology aren't paying attention, and even some of us who are paying attention aren't doing anything about it. And we're waiting for somebody to do something about it. And it's not like somebody else is going to do it. We're going to have to do it ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is like understanding that even if you feel like a cog in the machine as a technologist, you aren't. Like, there are other people that are like you and trying to protest the systems you're in. I mean, I think if we look, especially in the past year, we've heard rumors of like widespread groups and meetings of people inside of Facebook, inside of Google, really talking about the ramifications of the United States presidential election, of questioning, like, how did this happen inside these platforms, of wanting there to be even accountability inside of their own companies. I think it's really important for us to, like, think about that for a second, that that's happening right now, that people are starting to organize, that they are starting to ask questions. I think especially, like, looking at where we are right now in San Francisco, inside of us, like, the hub of Silicon Valley, we're in a space where is very amenable to protest. It's very amenable to supporting like ethical technology. How do we build more support for other people? Is it going to spaces we're not usually in? Is it going to other tech meetups? Maybe. Is it having hard conversations with other technologists? Probably. How do we push, like, the politics of our community into the wider spread community? We have to go and actually evangelize that, I think. It's one of the reasons that, like, I spend a fair amount of time writing for a lot of really much more like mundane or like to the point tech places. I write a lot for a design blog because I know product designers from Facebook read it. I like to go to conferences where they're there. I like to pitch different kinds of talks that really are focusing on, like, the ethical ramifications of technology. I'm also employed as an anti-harassment designer at Wikimedia, so it's not that strange for me to go there, but it's engaging in conversation with other technologists and knowing that, like, I have to do work as an activist. It means I have to talk and explain and help provide support and show other places to go. We could all do that in this room.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we all do that in this room because the marginalized communities that are the most affected by these technologies are never going to be able to do it for themselves. So it's kind of our thing. So I want to open it up to questions. Does anybody, I know we covered a lot and your brain's probably already exploding, but does anybody have something specific that they wanted to ask these guys while they have them? Hold up that. Huh? Oh.
Hi, to kind of maybe a little bridge this panel with the previous one. I mean, obviously these business entities, these government entities and their leadership are not going to be interested in the ethics of better data sets, better algorithms at any point. Like, there's no way we can control that. But do you think there's a way to, like, are there a lot of data sets in the public domain? Is there any way to put more data sets in the public domain and just give them more material to work with, where they can possibly get a broader spectrum of data instead of like relying on all of their own data?
I would say yes and no. I mean, I work for the Wikimedia Foundation. That's a nonprofit that powers Wikipedia. So often, like Wikidata is public. It's an open source data set. It's a difficult data set at times to use, but it's there. And if you go through, I think a number of different kinds of academic papers that are looking at big data, you'll see that like Wikidata is often referenced. I think it's really important though to acknowledge that like more data does not necessarily equal a more safer or equitable society. It is at times a good step towards that, but like, what would happen if we had more data for predictive policing software? Would we swing more towards a panopticon kind of dystopia, or would we swing back more towards like a more equitable society? It's hard to say because we also don't know the results of how that data would be used. We also don't know when that data is anonymized. For example, the Enron email data set, it's a non-anonymized data set. It's a canonical data set that's used in machine learning because it's one of the largest of its kind as an email data set, but it's non-anonymized. So that means that like people's personal information is in there. If you go through the Enron email data set, for example, and search shredding, what pops up is people's taco recipes because of shredded lettuce. But I don't think that anyone in that email, like who worked for that company, opted into that. So I often hesitate with, like, we do need a lot more open source data sets. We also need there to be like management of those data sets, anonymizing them, making sure that people know that like when they're contributing to this data set, how they're contributing to it, right? Would we all sign a different terms of service agreement if Twitter decided to make all of our tweets from here on forth public? Maybe, right? But people should be able to opt into these things. I think we could build collaborative data sets. This is something that Creative Commons is starting to look at as they're building more and more like infrastructure towards adding more and more like art files inside of Creative Commons, right? Like that can exist as like an open source image data set. People agree to a specific kind of copyright when they like, upload an image to Creative Commons. Maybe we could build a creative, collaborative, open source data set. And maybe it could be social data. Maybe people can donate their tweet archives there in a way that they are agreeing to giving everything over. And maybe it pulls DMs out, right? Maybe there's a way for people to give their tweets and also have them anonymized. But you need a governing body that is trustworthy and can be verifiably trustworthy in a way to manage that.
I don't know if that's possible, but
it's a lot of work.
Hi.
I'm no algorithms or the governance aspects, but our programmers and technologists, are they giving up their voice in a way by driving the accessibility of the data and the algorithms? Public domain where are the forums for the people creating the algorithms to really think about what they're doing in creating them, or is it, yeah.
Is your question more, where is the space for engineers who are working in research labs that are creating algorithms? Where are there parameters or structure for them to begin looking at the ethical ramifications of what they're building?
Right, I question that there's any good to come out of the data, because it seems like it's already biased. It would bias the action by the authorities.
I mean, there are like the emergence of new institutions right now that are specifically focused on algorithmic, not algorithmic justice, but like looking at the implications of algorithms from an ethical standpoint. AI Now Institute, which is a part of NYU, which is run by Kate Crawford and Meredith Whitaker, that is like the whole reason that institute exists now.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are institutions, but to your earlier question, yes, we absolutely have a responsibility, and when we're not engaging with each other and we're not doing these things, we are forgoing that responsibility, and I think that we in technology can learn a lot from the labor movement of the 19th and 20th century, where a lot of these institutions there were no, they were completely against workers and employees, but we're not talking about, obviously we're not talking about, work conditions, because when you're working at Google, you're not worried about your work conditions, if you can skateboard in your free time or whatever, it's more about what the ethical responsibility that we have. Should we borrow some ideas and techniques? Should we strike? Should we unionize? Should we, should we talk about different means of doing things that we haven't talked about in decades?
Occupy algorithms.
Yeah, that was an idea. Occupy algorithms.
Can I just add one more?
Yeah.
One more thing really quickly about engineers taking an active role in seeing through that these things are used ethically. And I think it's important to think about their job not as ending when, say, they have ensured that the predictions coming out of their algorithm are themselves fair, but that they're actually being used fairly by the people who are tasked with using them. So, for example, in the risk assessment, the pretrial, the bail hearings type of things, right? You could spend a lot of time. Hopefully, there are. And I'm sure there are very ethical and conscientious people trying to make sure those things, what's coming out of the recommendations are fair with whatever definition of fairness you decide is correct in that specific setting. But at the end of the day, real people are interacting with these predictions and these recommendations, and they're not living in isolation. Then a real person is processing that prediction or that recommendation and then making a decision on the basis of that. So the job isn't done just to make sure what's coming out of your model is fair. The job is done when you're making sure that it's being used fairly.
And you could talk to these people. They're there.
Yeah.
You can engage with communities that are affected by these things. They have I spend a lot of time working and going and visiting and talking with activists across the country. And there are people that they have more localized. Obviously, there's more localized issues, and but people are working together. But we in technology, we can engage with these people. We can talk to them. We can show up, and ask them. They know this stuff. They like I said earlier, people know what the consequences of our systems are. Sometimes we're the ones not paying attention to what those are.
Ida Mominjed, who's a postdoc neuroscientist at Princeton University, who's working with creating machine learning models to study the brain, specifically PTSD, has talked a lot about nurturing in algorithms, nurturing machine learning models and algorithms, and not just letting them run wild, but actually building a sustainable system where you spend years with the thing you're working on and getting it to a point where and then checking and rechecking and checking, like you are growing or raising something, that you are raising an algorithm. And I really sort of love that. She had a beautiful metaphor that I'm blanking on right now, but I think that that's also something we're thinking about, which is not the way in which technology or product-based companies look at a product, which is we put it out in the world, it's finished and it's done, but that's not really the case with machine learning.
Hi, I'm Madeline. Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. It's really great to see the voices of women engaged on this topic. And thank you for bringing up machine learning, because that's where I guess a lot of time and attention is going towards. And we have the luxury of being able to have empathy and empathizing, I guess, with others and who's involved with these data sets. But I guess my concern is, with a lot of people in artificial intelligence, are we training our algorithms to have some sort of empathy, to think about these issues and be concerned with the greater good? And what does that look like? And sorry, I started spontaneously applauding when you said and what should we do, or should we do anything at all? And then with the Wikimedia Foundation, it's I was involved with this hackathon, because there's not a lot of women contributing to Wikipedia, and I did for a bit, and then I just quit. And I don't know. What are your thoughts? Thanks.
Thank you.
So many.
What do you think, Caroline?
We would love to have you come back and contribute. And if you want to talk about Wikipedia more specifically, I'm around all day. I think that I struggle with how to answer this question because, we shouldn't fear algorithms or artificial intelligence or machine learning. I think what we should be skeptical of are the things we should always be skeptical of, which are how things are sold to us. How are they used in large-scale bureaucratic systems? How are they used in non-bureaucratic systems? I think really what we should also sort of push towards is noticing that we're entering an age where like the opt-out is designed out, right? So a lot of times artificial intelligence or machine learning algorithms are just humming in the background the way that like there's electricity in this building, right? We didn't walk into this building and opt in to there being electricity here. It's here. We can see it, right? But we don't know like what kind of energy it's run on, for example. Is this clean energy? Is this dirty energy? That we have no idea, right? We can't opt into that in a way. And I think that's the way to start thinking about algorithms, thinking about artificial intelligence and machine learning systems, especially inside of technology. It is a thing that you can't see, that you are aware of that's there. But I think it's important to sort of push towards like what would a rating system for algorithms look like? Should there be better models of how they're used inside of products, for example? There's a lot of machine learning that is done inside of Wikipedia, and that makes the encyclopedia at times a lot better. There are like little bots to help people onboard. There are bots that are designed to help look at vandalizing edits, and those are things that are really important. And those are things to like not necessarily fear, right? Like there are plenty of algorithms that are designed that work pretty well for like looking at financial fraud. And they have a system feedback loop where they're not sure if you've ever gotten a text message from your bank like, hey, did you really make this purchase? That is like a way to check. It's not an opt-in for you to be a part of their fraud algorithmic system, but it is a way for you to somewhat intervene. I think it's important to think about and pull back that like there are like small algorithms that work very well in our daily lives, like algorithmic recommendations in Spotify or Netflix. Like, should you opt into those? They're designed to be whimsical and delightful. And that's like a product that's designed for entertainment. Well, what happens, with something you can't opt into, which again is like the other end of the spectrum, which we've been talking about with predictive policing or surveillance. But there's not an opt-in for either. And how do you think of all the stuff in the middle? And I'm biased as someone who's a design researcher, that I think that you need a design for that. You need an interface. You need things that let people opt into it.
She asked, what about privacy by design?
I guess, can you explain a little bit more what you mean by privacy by design?
Wait, say it again. Having an opt-in model for all of this, privacy by design. The default is privacy.
Ooh, good luck.
Yeah.
That's how it used to be.
I know,
that's how it used to be, man. What the hell?
I think that most things, if not all things, should have, if not an opt-in, at least clear like outlining as to how they're using your data. Inside of Wikipedia, for example, we don't keep a lot of like a long record of where people come from other websites to Wikipedia. We throw that away after a couple days. I think that oftentimes companies ask for more data than they need to make any kind of decisions. I'm very pro-privacy. I don't think we often need as much as we think we need in terms to make a product work. But I will say with like some algorithmic systems that run, they're running in the way in which, again, like electricity runs in your house. Should we opt in for electricity? And it's hard to opt out of that now if you live in like a multi-person building, right? So how do you opt out of like algorithms working in different parts of the internet? They're just kind of there. Then I think that's a whole deeper question of should they be there or not. But again, I want to highlight that not all algorithms are bad. But they're also not our robot overlords, though, because there is a difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence and robotics. Not to get like pedantic, but it is important to question what do they do and how are they doing it, and that is a transparency that we don't see on like major websites or platforms.
Yeah.
But on Wikipedia, there is a lot of explanation as to what our bots do and how we're using artificial intelligence because we are radically open source.
Yeah. So on that note, I want to just point out that first off, like I just go on my phone and I look at like any application that I use where I want to set the privacy settings on, and the number of windows and boxes and like things that I have to like go through in a convoluted order. Like companies are deliberately doing these things to make to make it.
They don't want you to be private.
Yeah, they're trying to do these things. So like that, like it's clearly not a priority for corporations or for major institutions to do this. So like that's again on us in the tech. And that actually work with the technology and write the code. And on the robot overlord part, I look at the I look at the world that we have today, and I see like the results of algorithms that are interacting with the results of other algorithms. And I honestly ask the question sometimes whenever I see like algorithms that are creating these feedback loops. I wonder if we're creating an ecosystem in which humans are no longer the real person. Like, are we really in control of the algorithms that we write? Are the algorithms just creating feedback loops at this point? Have we created a symbiotic ecosystem?
I would say yes and no, but I think the thing about this is like we're also not in control of most things.
That's true. Because
there's such a there's how do you overcome capitalistic control or control of things? Like we don't have ownership inside of a space like Twitter, right? We're not stakeholders in this room in Twitter. We're not. I'm not.
I feel like I do sometimes.
Right, but if we all got together and said, I would like these kinds of privacy settings, and let's create a petition and put this on a list somewhere, a community wish list for Twitter. They have no obligation to fulfill that wish list, right? They have no obligation or timeline to deliver on that. And so I think I'm like less terrified of are we stuck in an algorithmic feedback loop. In some cases we are. I'm actually like much more skeptical of the way in which our internet is partitioned by like major companies, and there's no real way for us to intervene or protest within that. That's what I'm afraid of. We're losing the internet.
Right. So I wanted Brewster to talk a little bit about some of these privacy issues because they've been playing with AI. Actually, Tracy Jaquith was going to talk about it this morning, but she had an emergency. But they managed to handle the data correctly and keep it private, and it's in a larger trend of the way that the Internet Archive stopped saving things about their users that other people might want. And I just want Brewster to talk about it because this is really a lot of these issues. They're all collecting data from different places, and they act like, oh, it's just so hard to not include the private stuff, and it's actually not that hard.
Yeah, I'm an old style big data guy, and we used to collect a lot of data at Alexa Internet, company I started, and I found that we didn't need a lot of it. And there was this general presumption that there's gold in them thar hills, and that's where it's all going to be, so we better collect it, and we're not quite sure what we're going to do with it yet, but some of it's actually toxic waste. And so the Internet Archive, we've tried to not collect IP addresses, and that's been working out actually quite well for us. It shortens conversations sometimes with people we don't want to have long conversations with. They come and they ask us for things, and we say we don't have it, so they turn away and go away, as opposed to arguing about not giving it to them. And we turn on IP addresses and collecting them when there are problems, when there are some of these attacks of different forms, and then we turn that on and turn it off. Another thing I learned out of this is actually don't certify that you're not collecting certain things, because also in a previous company, doing that goes and gets you such that you can be in endless legal problems trying to prove that you did what you said you were not going to do, which is, okay, so going and saying that that we're never going to collect IP addresses would be dangerous to us, because in a circumstance I was involved in, they said, okay, you said this, that's a contract, therefore you have to prove that you can never do that in any possible universe. And it was awful. So so that's sort of going the other way. But I'd suggest you can throw away a lot of things. There was also something that Sam Stoller figured out how to do here at the Internet Archive, which was to go and get the benefits of Google Analytics without giving them the IP addresses of our users. So there are amazing, wonderful tools out there that are really tempting to use, but we basically proxy things through, hash the IP addresses before they go to Google, so that we can get counts and things like that, use their tools. But we're not bugging our users by sending beacons to third parties. So it's a two-way street, but I'd say that there's mechanisms of trying to just challenge that idea of, well, maybe we should collect it just because maybe. It's just try not collecting it and seeing if anybody really cares, especially people in marketing. They just say, oh, we need it. It's like, why? Well, I don't know, because it's good. So just try sort of decreasing it and seeing if you can get by with your user counts and things like that with hashes of IP addresses rather than the actual addresses. We redo our seeds of our hashes every day so that we can go and get statistics during a day, but you can't figure out who is who across days, even with data mining. I'm sure, though, you probably could. And going and saying that anything is anonymous, I find actually doesn't happen. I mean, there's just something that you can dig and dig and dig and find things that can get you in trouble. And we have lots of data sets. We're full of petabytes of data sets, and almost all of them have rights issues, and they're thorny in some way or another. That does require some vetting of their use.
Totally. I mean, I think there's all sorts of social data that exists inside of data sets that we forget about. The way you misspell things, the time zone you write in. I mean, that's how the creator of Silk Road was pinpointed to his actual identity, right? How you say things and the way you say them and the time you say them are all identifying data markers. And you can't scrub some of that out, but yeah.
Okay, great. Well, you guys, we're going to wrap it up. We're about to come back with, we're about to come back with Barrett Brown and Steve Phillips, who are going to be launching the Pursuance project for the first time. We're going to take a 10-minute break and then come back with everybody. And so I just wanted to thank, is there anything any of you guys want to say before we call it quits? Anything else you're burning to say?
Put it on the blockchain.
Oh, okay.
That's it.
That's it? No hype here. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. We'll be back in 10 minutes. And for those of you at home, don't go away. We'll be right back.
Hello, hello. Can people hear me? Audio on, audio on. Check, check. Barrett, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, cool. That's convenient. And I can hear you.
Oh, how works that? I would hope that a conference full of 200 hackers would be able to set up audio.
Hello, hello.
Sorry, it's a little bit complicated of a sound check here, bringing Barrett in and getting the demo ready. Just 1 second. Live demos. Ah!
Oh, yes, there will be demos. Feedback? Rob, is that you?
All right. So thanks a lot, everybody. I'm actually about to say something like for you out in TV land. So thanks a lot for coming today. Today's kind of an exciting day in so many different ways, and now is one of them. We're going to be bringing Barrett Brown in live from Texas, and it's really nice to have him out of prison. I really enjoyed his prison writings a lot. I felt kind of guilty when I would read them sometimes, because I was like, I didn't want him to have been in prison for him to have written this, but I'm really enjoying reading it. So, oh well, I'll take it, you know.
And he won the National Magazine Award while in solitary confinement.
And he just won the National Magazine Award while in solitary confinement, but he won another big thing recently that I can't remember. Anyway, he's continuing to win awards on a regular basis for his writing, would be an easy way of saying that. And so he had some ideas for some software and that he thought about when he was in prison. And as soon as he was out, Steve hopped on a plane to go meet with him and was made the project lead kind of instantaneously, and the rest is kind of history. And we invited them here today, and they're going to show us their software, and it is democracy building software. It's more of this theme that I'm trying to get through people about this whole hackathon of combining our forces all over the world and not stopping. Let's keep this going. And Pursuance is one of these tools to help you connect with the other people that want to fix the things that you want to fix. And I'm really excited about being able to launch it here. So I'm going to let Steve take over and let him introduce Barrett for you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Lisa? Everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Audio's good? Audio's good? People can hear me?
Turn them up.
Great. All right, so thank you, Lisa. Excellent to be here at the Aaron Swartz Day. I'd like to first start on a sort of personal note. So 2 years ago, I was in Santa Barbara, and I saw some tweets from the Tor project, and they said, oh, there's going to be this gathering, it's called Aaron Swartz Day, and like here's the amazing speakers that are going to be there, and here's the amazing talks, and here's the projects. And I thought that sounded so compelling that I immediately came up here to sort of visit, and I was so impressed by the people at Aaron Swartz Day that it convinced me to move to San Francisco. So 1 year ago, I come in, there's like, not many spots available. I sit down, there's one person there, I said, hey, what's your name? He says, Micah. I said, Micah Lee? Like, from The Intercept and like all this stuff? Yeah. So that was really exciting. And then Roger Dingledine from Tor was chatting with Bram Cohen, who invented BitTorrent, just hanging out. Like, that's pretty neat. Maybe I should be exactly right here all the time. So a year ago, I did move here. And then since then, I've been doing weekly Saturday hackathons every 4 to 10 p.m. at Noisebridge, sort of modeled after Aaron Swartz Day. And then since then, been able to recruit for projects. And then just a few months after that, I read a Wired magazine article. Said Barrett Brown's out of jail and he's doing awesome stuff again. And I read this post from Wired, and it says, Barrett Brown is envisioning this end-to-end encrypted environment where you can like collaborate with other like activists and journalists and people who are trying to change the world. And I thought that sounded ultra compelling. So I immediately reached out to him in like 5 different ways: snail mail and Twitter and email, like all in parallel. And I got through in just 2 days. And then I jumped on a plane and flew to Texas to meet Barrett. And like Lisa said, things have been happening quickly since then. So thank you, Aaron Swartz Day. All right, Barrett, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, let's talk a little bit about your background. So Lisa alluded to some of it. So you won the National Magazine Award, but let's go back to maybe like 2010. You have the sense that we should be using the internet for like activist type things. You have all these people online, even if it's just a small percentage of people who really care about issues. I mean, there's billions of people online, so that could be quite the force. So take me back to some of your thinking around that time, kind of right before you started doing work with Anonymous.
At that point, I had been a journalist and media critic, specializing in ways in which politics deteriorates because of the failures of information, the failures of the press. And so my emphasis was on those particular issues. At the same time, like a lot of people, I was becoming aware of the potential that existed latent within the information age. Also aware that this was not being harnessed. When Anonymous began doing things like Church of Scientology protests in 2008, that obviously was a proof of concept. That meant that you could, in this day and age, as a few people with no resources, launch a massive campaign against a powerful institution and get results. And this was done very haphazardly. All the Anonymous stuff was. I was wondering if we could systematize that sort of thing. So Project PM began in 2009. I recruited a number of people, academics and programmers, activists, some of whom are still involved in this new project. And we were putting together a framework for bloggers to better communicate and better perpetuate actual information within the kind of broken information stream that this nation relies on, as well as a civic network for non-media people to better do the things that need to be done in any society. That kind of got put to the wayside when I got involved with Anonymous in late 2010. They were supporting the Tunisian revolution. They had a number of figures in Anonymous who were also major figures in the Tunisian revolt. One of them later on joined the government. And what happened there was obviously another great proof of concept. And from there on, we got into this conflict with the intelligence contracting industry, the U.S. surveillance and intelligence community. That's what we started focusing on with Project PM. We put together another proof of concept, a crowdsourced research project to continue to go through these stories even after the press had abandoned them, to make sure that the materials that leakers and hackers put out regarding these secret programs were actually analyzed and presented in a way that any journalist could take the ball and run with it. And we were successful enough that the FBI listed Project PM and our website on my search warrant when they eventually raided me. So went to prison, got out. The ideal is still there. The society our institutions are more broken than ever. Things have changed in terms of perception, such that some of the people who I think still believed that the structures we have are sufficient to continue this republic as a moral enterprise. Those people have now started to realize that there is something fundamentally wrong that cannot be fixed within the usual processes. And so there's a subset of those people who also do recognize that the internet, that we live in an important age in which the environment has fundamentally changed, in which for the first time in history, any individual can collaborate with any other individual across the planet without an intermediary. That's an extraordinary change in the basic building blocks of society. And all of our institutions grew up in a very different environment in which that collaboration was limited, and thus institutions had to arise. So we're at a period in which we have to make sure that we get to this first. It's almost like a space race or a colonial kind of thing. We have to ensure that the internet is working for the open society, because the people on the alt-right, the national populists across the world, totalitarian regimes, our own increasingly authoritarian republic, they're paying attention to the internet. They're making great strides in using it for surveillance and for espionage and for a number of propaganda apparatus that we've seen here and elsewhere. And so it's important that we figure out the fundamentals quickly and start getting people brought onto a single program where they can maintain their independence while also having an unprecedented agility in terms of organizing.
Okay, so yeah, clearly agility is very very important. So you started talking about like the haphazard way that that you and Anonymous were operating. Like tell us about some of those challenges you faced, right? Like before you described like there's one giant chat room and one disruptive person that you couldn't really kick out, could cause a bunch of issues. You mentioned that in our first or second meeting, and then there was a wiki.
Go back and forth.
Live stream, recorded, broadcast. Just so you know. Just so that you can have it to be able to listen to it other times.
Exactly.
Right?
I get it.
Yes. Well, going and being there's a lecture series, there's a class at Stanford that I've gone and lectured at multiple times, and there aren't any students there at all.
Oh, really?
None. And they just they watch all the lectures. They are taking the class, but they watch all the lectures at the end of the semester, and just sort of back to back, and they just watch, maybe at high speed.
No.
I think we're on. See if it works.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are usually a bunch
Yes,
of
click
people from
on it.
industry and a lot of professors that will go, and there'll be interactions. And at least when I've been
What
there,
does it say?
you know, they're fairly well attended.
It says
but
it's waiting.
Not one student.
It says it's
And
waiting.
in fact, there was
Waiting.
one I just asked, can I get on the network? Is there anybody here
So how long
that has
till we're
credentials with Stanford?
not waiting?
None.
Okay.
But it was a class.
I guess keep refreshing the page. Again, in theory.
Which is the courses. What I really like having the students be there
Yeah.
because
What are you teaching?
it's teaching Go.
Right.
And there are a lot of classes that really get
I've seen you speak either.
So are you sure that it's going? It's not coming up.
You studied some of the hacker keys.
Yeah, exactly. First open source, free software, development.
Right.
And then anonymous, which is like super different.
Where's my
Yes.
bag? Where'd my go? Oh, is my coat? Yeah, I need my coat. Sorry.
So I'll do everything.
No, my coat's there too, right? Oh, you don't have my coat? Oh.
Free software.
No.
Sherry.
Thank you.
Sherry Burkle at MIT.
Oh, Turkle.
Sherry Turkle.
Yes.
So I took
We're
a
just-
class from her when I
We're
was
just verifying.
an undergraduate.
Nick?
It was completely wild because she was
We're just verifying that the stream's working, and then we're ready to go here.
Really like ahead of it.
so she was trying to
It's true, this is my first stream, so sorry ahead of time.
Yeah. And I'm interested in trying to understand more systematically some of the open source world by these firms. Again, with the complicity of the DOJ. Sorry, with the complicity of the DOJ. And but after and that was a big story for a month or so. And it was on Colbert, and NBC had me on, and I talked about that. They forgot to actually mention what we uncovered. They just talked about the hacking, because that's what's important to them. It's NBC. You know, and so as always with these media structures, you know, a story doesn't necessarily get pursued till the real end of it. It doesn't get pursued to such a point in which the actual civic purpose of journalism has achieved something. It gets pursued until such time as editors and producers kind of collectively decide, oh, that story's done. Meanwhile, there's 70,000 emails still sitting there, and we've already found these extraordinary pieces of information in there. So Project PM the intention was to pursue these because of the other illustrative thing about this, which was that even as this unusual circumstances arose where the Nation at large and CNN and New York Times are all reporting on this conspiracy that was unveiled, there were no real consequences for those involved. Palantir, which was one of the firms involved in this, you know, continued to gain influence. Peter Thiel is now more powerful than ever. The actual employee that Palantir put on leave originally, as sort of to try to blame it on him, he was later promoted. So we see here how both the state and our media, as currently constituted, are just not up to this task of discovering you know, these stories. And even when someone discovers it for them, as Anonymous did, and as we did by you know, pushing this and giving them the emails, they're not able to run with the ball all the way. And so later on, we uncovered some more programs, including Romas Coin, that I wrote about for The Guardian, that we put up on our website. We had probably dozens and dozens of people over the next year and a half research, all volunteer research, few journalists, people with think tanks and foundations here and in Europe, who did a great job of compiling all this thing, and it made it a very unique resource. But the fact of the matter was that even with all this documented, when there was a call in Congress for an investigation into the DOJ and into these companies, committing these extraordinary crimes against democracy, frankly, that investigation was shot down by Lamar Smith, the Republican from Texas, who actually just retired a couple days ago. He said the DOJ should be the one to determine if a crime was committed. Of course, the DOJ was not in a hurry to investigate this since they had created this. So that was another illustrative example of why these kind of things are needed. We have these structures that just are not up to these tasks. We have to build our own structures, and we've seen we've seen the proof of concept on different levels of activism, launching campaigns, crowdsourced research, working with journalists to try to strengthen the media structures. We've seen them all work to some extent, even with these haphazard associational groups that pop up. Now let's see what we can do with a systematic version of this. And obviously, you know, we can expect that we can do quite a bit more.
Awesome. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about sort of the first wave of online journalism. So you're starting to say that, like, we need to keep the agility. We need a large number of people to be able to collaborate. It sounds like if people are causing trouble, you need to be able to kind of kick them out and have the good people, you know, productive people stay. Okay, so let's start talking about Pursuance then. So Pursuance obviously is supposed to be the you know, something you've been thinking about for years now, and something that we'll be demoing, the first live demo of Pursuance ever in a few minutes. Let's talk about Pursuance. So what is the Pursuance system? There's several ways that we've used to describe it. You know, it's a sort of ecosystem of people using the Pursuance system software in order to collaborate in various ways. We want to amplify the efforts of activists, journalists, and nonprofits. So, like, what are ways that you like to describe Pursuance?
Well, let's start with a couple of descriptions we've thought up, because you know, we've tried to kind of explain this with the elevator pitch, and it takes a lot of terms, frankly. It's a very wide, very broad framework. So it can be thought of as sort of a combination, something between a political party and a union, less overtly political, less specifically political and political party, but more you know, ideological than a union. It's a collaborative framework for civics. It's a digital ecosystem for collaboration. It's a number of things all in one. Fundamentally, it is a framework whereby a certain population of individuals are brought in, each of whom, having been brought into the system, all have the equal rights to do several things. One, they can start their own pursuance. Pursuance is an entity that, once formed, has a sort of, let's say, a DNA/constitution. That's determined by the person who creates it. It can grow out, expand in different ways after that. And there's many different ways in which that expansion and in which the delegation of powers can be done. Because this is a network in which everyone has the right to create these pursuances, that makes it okay for anyone who creates one to govern it however they like. And anyone who wants to join on to, for instance, pursuance in which a single person is directing 3 other people and they make all the decisions and everyone else is kind of volunteers, people who want to join that can do that. People who don't can create their own very similar pursuance doing the same thing, but as a full democracy. So it's hard to get into some of the fundamentals of this without a diagram, but just think of it as an open space. Think of every user as a circle, and think of the pursuance itself as a square. Circle creates a little square here. He determines this pursuance is for prison reform. We're going to go about prison reform under these broad methods that I've thought up so far. And I'm going to I've created 2 positions linking off from me. One is public relations, one is research. And I'm giving both those people agency to bring on whoever they want under them and structure it however they like. They could bring on 10 people who themselves can bring on 50 people altogether, blah, 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 so long as they do these functions that I've set out for them. That's one way of structuring. And so that's basically what it is. Now beyond that, there's lots of extra details that we've added, especially in the last year, starting with your meeting when you came down to Dallas, in which we started coming up with a lot of ways in which this can work even better than that would. I mean, I think that on itself would be an improvement in a lot of ways over IRC, for instance, or Facebook or Twitter, not least of which because it's not run by government-friendly entities, but also on an organizational platform. But when you start looking at the other things that we've added here, the different options by which the same structural shape can actually work differently, the options by which pursuances can, once formed, collaborate with other pursuances, creating either informal or formal connections to trade information, resources, that kind of thing. When you look at the ideas of PRUs, where we have pursuances that the purpose of which is to, at different times, provide a particular service to more large-scale pursuances, like let's say we have a crew of designers or coders, and there's groups that are just NGOs or there are entities that have been created here, and occasionally they'll need some digital campaign design done, or occasionally they'll need copyright, or occasionally they'll need coding. Those crews make themselves available to them, just as happens, again, in a more haphazard manner in an anonymous IRC or anything else, where some person is known for a particular skill. You go to him and say, hey, we want you to make this design for this slogan, blah, blah, blah. So eventually you have, with the kind of people we're bringing on here, you have this proliferating ecosystem that expands as each participant helps it expand. The other method by which it's populated, besides us bringing on people on our own right, is by virtue of each participant being able to bring on others. Anyone who comes into the system has a right to bring on some number of other people over time. We haven't figured out the exact parameters of that. It may be, you may be able to bring on 5, and then a month later we can bring on 5 more.
Right.
We're trying to toying with the ways in which we think that will best keep the quality up. But bottom line is, the reason this can grow perpetually without us being worried about it, doing this kind of things that institutions do when they grow, or doing the kind of things that movements do when they grow, without deteriorating, as they often do, is because we've sort of worked in several mechanisms into this that kind of self-correct. Just an example of what we're trying to avoid. Reddit, I noticed back in 2009, had been for a couple of years a very, probably the best platform, the best medium by which to get information in this society. And that's because you had a very erudite, sort of early adapter usership at Reddit for the most part early on. The threshold for knowing about Reddit was such that you tended to be a software engineer or a writer or whatever. And so people submitting articles to Reddit, you go to the comment section, the comments that get voted up tend to be something, if there's a critique that's needed of the article, you'll probably see that critique there. You'll probably see a link saying, oh, this article actually misstates this. Here's a link to an academic paper showing this.
Right.
It was an extraordinary resource. But over time, and this is, you'll see this is similar with other movements and structures, the average user quality does go down. And that's not because everyone who comes on after a certain point is lesser than the original occupants, but that does tend to be what we've seen to be the process. There does tend to be a lower usership. So we solve this by a number of ways. We'll discuss those in a bit. But that's what we sort of have our eye on here. How can we build something that grows, an ecosystem that can grow and pursuances that can grow and expand over time without us having to worry about what will this become later? Is this going to become, is this going to become part of the problem? That's something we're able to avoid to an extent, I think, beyond anything else, any other structure of movements, because we've had the advantage of being able to see how these things work over the last 10 years very closely, sometimes from the inside. And we've kind of solved, to some extent, the problem of the debilitation that comes with growth.
Right. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about what the sort of goals of Pursuance are. Right. So there's various sorts of injustices. Anyone who's especially internet connected, that seems like 90% of what we see is negative. So there's tons of problems. Prison reform is something that needs to occur. There's the drug war that's a huge problem. Mass surveillance. Many other issues. So others you'd like to touch upon that you think in particular Pursuance should lend itself well to when it comes to pushing up against these various injustices, in addition to the crowdsourced investigative journalism that you mentioned. I think that's a good one as well.
So yeah, so there's obviously a focus that we've had in envisioning different kinds of pursuances, a few of which we're actually going to create in order to help get things started. Prison reform is one of them. We'll go into that later. Crowdsourced journalism, we've seen how that can be done. We've created some examples that we'll make available soon, I believe, on our website of how a journalist can use this, can come in, bring on two people that he, maybe a college student or whatever, two people he trusts to, not waste his time, and give them the ability to bring on a big web of people under them, so that if a journalist wants to research a topic, he's able to convey this message to his two people under him, saying, hey, we're looking into we're looking into campaign financing, and I need to do a story on this aspect of it. They send the message down to everybody. Everyone now knows we want information on this particular thing, and they can collaborate however they will. But the alternative to that, the traditional way that's done, the way it's been done for hundreds of years, frankly, without really fundamentally changing, is you have an editor, and you have a journalist, and you have a fact checker, maybe. As someone who's been a freelancer for a long time for a lot of publications, I can tell you that process is far from ideal. You can never expect 100% accuracy from any outlet, but outlets in general have not really been trying because there's really no impetus to it. They can get things wrong here and there. People generally don't know, including the editors themselves, unless it happens to be your industry or your field that's being discussed. But at any rate, editors and journalists and fact checkers should not be expected to be able to know what the best place is to look for information. They're dealing with sources that may or may not know what they're talking about themselves, and may or may not have an agenda. And that's hard to catch. Anyone who's been covered in the press, like I have, I've had the unique position of being a journalist who has been the subject of journalists. So I've been able to see how errors creep in, how they get repeated. Journalists copy off each other quite a bit. You can't blame them, they don't make much money. So this model, we think, is not just something that'll work better, but it's something that we can actually convince journalists to try. We have a partnership in the works with Russ Baker, who's on our board of directors. He's a great journalist, formerly for the New Yorker, former board of the Columbia Journalism Review, founder of Who, What, Why, which is an outlet that actually, I've noticed them when they wrote the first extensive, comprehensive, and accurate article on my case that I'd seen for a year after my prison. I was very impressed by that. Anyway, there are people that are interested in these kind of things, and so we're going to have journalists there kind of serve as guinea pigs on these projects. So people out there who, they want to see better journalism, and they happen to know things. Right now they're tweeting stuff like, hey, that's wrong. Yeah. They can actually, they can join a couple different journalists, and every once in a while when the thing comes down, they can have a chance to go find something and say, look, here's, or help fact check a story. This is something that can become common. It's something that it's good for journalists, not just to be accurate, which may not matter to a journalist depending on his moral character, but it does help them get things done faster and quicker and better, frankly. So this is something we can sell journalists on. And that's what we look for is how can we not just think of ideas that work better, but think of ideas that can be implemented, that will gain mass acceptance. Another example, any NGO, nonprofit that exists right now. There's a great quote that we bat around by Rich Falkberg, who's the founder of the Pirate Party in Sweden. He wrote a book a couple of years ago. I haven't read, but I've seen a passage from it. When he's talking to the head of an NGO or some such, and he's telling him, the problem you need to be worrying about is not the people that work for you. The problem you should be worrying about is the thousands of people that want to work for you, but you don't let them.
Yes.
The Pursuance system is going to allow any nonprofit, large or small, to quickly create a Pursuance presence. And from there, without putting in a great deal of time or effort or money, no money whatsoever, frankly, they'll be able to actually mobilize their existing supporters, mobilize the people who are right now writing $2 checks, but who would like to help, here and there on something that will be meaningful. So we're going to, at a time when we need a lot of the NGOs like the ACLU and that kind of thing, when those people are dealing with an expanded field of problems, we're going to help give them a vastly expanded field of support. So it's very similar across the board. Anything that's been done, any of the campaigns in terms of, SOPA, that legislation that a couple years ago was brought down in large part because of this cooperative emergent campaign by the internet community. Those are things that can all be better pursued with this. Journalism,
right.
Traditional activism, digital activism. And then we have a lot of specific examples that we'll talk about later on that will kind of give you a better sense of what we envision. And we should also keep in mind that as we provide these examples, the people who use this system are going to think up an extraordinary array of new techniques on doing addressing existing problems, as well as thinking up entirely new procedures to address them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, it's like forward-looking people initially on Reddit. I mean, we should be able to harness that same sort of dynamic with Pursuance, and in particular the crowdsourced investigative journalism. Kind of like you said, it's sort of revolutionizing the way journalism works. They don't have tons of money. People want to volunteer. It seems like there's a good match to be made there. So, okay, in one of your articles recently, Barrett, you said, "It is an absolute certainty that, with sufficient thought, a new mechanism may someday be designed capable of integrating thousands of talented individuals and existing organizations into a sort of parallel civic ecosystem." Let's see. Final comments related to that quote, and then I think we're about ready for a demo, and then we can do more comments after that, and then I have some slides to go into some details about the Pursuance system and sort of how it works and our next steps. Do you want to key off of the epic quote of yours that I just mentioned?
Right. So we have a lot of sort of somewhat ambitious goals with this. I mean, we're all pretty much agreed that this is something that will kickstart activism as we know it, very soon with very immediate results. But over the long term, we think there's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of vacuums that are there to be filled, and that as we provide more proofs of concept, as we see some successes with this, and as this thing naturally grows, and grows at the same time more nuanced, better structured, as people develop better pursuances, they figure out more efficiently how to organize people to different tasks. And as they take advantage of our data library, by which anyone who creates a pursuance or a structure of a pursuance for a particular task can submit it to our central library, provide some notation on how this worked and why. Other people can draw from that, improve it, onward, resubmit it, so forth. With these several methods of evolution that are kind of incorporated into the system, several other methods of growth, this is something that ultimately can challenge the most powerful institutions in the world, just as movements in the past have done so. But we're going to increase that tempo. We're going to ensure that even if not everybody's on the same page and marching to the same drum, they at least have the option to do so to whatever extent they want to. So building a platform that's really going to unify the open society people who oppose the police state, people who oppose the surveillance state. We can do that if we ensure that the people who come in will have their independence and only have to unify to the extent that they choose to. And when you have a large population that's in broad agreement on some of these larger issues, they'll be able to work together on that sort of overlap of issues that most well-informed people agree with: the drug war, corporate welfare, leaving behind whatever disagreements they have on other issues. So this is something that's intended to counter the sort of splitting that occurs in activism and in NGOs, and to by sort of offering them a carrot to the extent that they can get more help here, they can get more support, they can bring on more people here, and they can work with other groups vastly more easily, in large part not because they're present, but because the way pursuances are generally structured, you can see what they're doing. You can see what they need, and what you need, or what they have, and approach another pursuance and say, hey, we're both doing this kind of thing, do you want to share information? That process, as it goes forward, is when it creates something, a sort of superorganism that would be formidable in global affairs. That's something that can happen in 20 years.
Awesome. Okay, so the last few steps have been, you know, sort of taking your vision, and then over the last 7 months, you know, I've been I did 16 hours of user interviews to make sure that, like, kind of combining Barrett's vision with the problems that, like, existing activists have had in doing activism, making sure that we're solving as many of those as possible with, like, kind of the smallest and simplest possible feature set, and making it all secure and encrypted, sort of combining end-to-end encrypted task management, various gamification elements, real-time chat, the ability to kind of ask for help, and various other things that I'm excited to show you. So shall we do the first live demo of the Pursuance system?
Let's do it.
Woo! Awesome. All right, let me just pull this thing up. And I'm going to screen share with him. All right, cool. All right, you can see what's on my screen? Excellent. So this is Pursuance. If we go to our dashboard, here's different pursuances that we are a member of, right? A pursuance is like a group of people who, like, each particular group has its own mission. So prison reform, right? People are trying to oppose various issues with prisons, and then there's like a FOIA network. So people who are submitting, right, like freedom of information requests to the government to try to, you know, understand what our own government is doing with their own money. So here we have the prison reform pursuance, right? So there's the reason why this sort of task management feature is core is because if you want to have like a large number of people that are collaborating, being able to break up an ambitious goal into like smaller and smaller pieces that people can individually do, that's an extremely important thing. So if you use like Trello or Redmine or Asana or things like that before, task management in general isn't super popular. Most of them are very clunky. Pursuance is the only task management system in the world right now that allows you to very rapidly create structured tasks. So if I say, okay, we need to apply to foundations, and then within here I can just press tab and then MacArthur Foundation, and open philanthropy, that's a good one. And then if I press tab, here we see different people that we can assign this task to. And people who are familiar with task management are used to, okay, you have a small team, right? What is a team? That's what many of these pieces of software call it. A team is a small group of people. Everyone knows each other's names, everyone knows each other's skill set, but something that Barrett realized is possible, and that we sort of put our heads together and figured out that something that could empower, that could sort of enable this ecosystem of these different groups, is to be able to assign something to another group. So you can imagine having like this, you know, you have this like nested list of tasks. The high level things are typically very ambitious, and if you break those down into pieces, you can imagine having, you know, 10 different groups that you assign different things to, and then within those people subdivide, and then you have, you know, all these people playing their strengths, different kinds of people leveraging their individual skill set and their interests, and having these different groups kind of help each other. So what's the other thing here? So the ability to, let's see. Okay, so that's kind of what task management looks like. It was kind of subtle, but I have a karma score up here in the upper right, and that was increasing as I was performing activities. So people are used to karma as just kind of purely a social status type of thing, like it is on Reddit. But a feature that we will be adding to Pursuance is the ability to create a task, specify the skills necessary to complete that task, and then have the system automatically find the best person in the ecosystem to do that thing. So this is important because right now, if you want to do kind of large-scale activism, you have to personally know, or if you want to do impactful activism, you have to personally know all of those people, and you have to know all of their skill sets and like know who to kind of go to for various things. But if you have a good idea and you can get an invite to one of these pursuances, and then the ability to just kind of instantly hook into people with various expertise is, without having to build that sort of yourself, is really powerful. So karma points is a social status thing, but it also can make the system more efficient. Notifications wise, so if we look here at the top, so for the last few months I've been kind of watching the way this kind of pool of activists that Ray Johansson, our international coordinator, has collected. He knows many thousands of activists. I'll mention him a little bit more later. We have a couple of chat servers where people are doing various sorts of activism, and in seeing them operate, I couldn't help but notice all the time that, yeah, sometimes you have chat messages in, you know, like there's nothing but chat messages in the chat software, but there's things that are not really messages that we pretend are messages because we only have messaging, and there's not as good of tools out there as what we need that sort of combines some of these features together. So what they keep doing is kind of saying, hey, can I get a signal boost on this? Like, can you retweet this? Can you, sign this petition? Can you post this to Facebook? Something like that. So I realized that we should have those separated out, right? It shouldn't just be in this sea of messages. There's like conversations, there's different conclusions people have reached, there's things that you're being asked to do, and it's easy to lose all these things, right? So being able to say, hey, can someone signal boost this, and then have this kind of action, like kind of, we have like 5 different names for it. We're still choosing it, but like having this sort of action broadcast where it's not a normal task where you have one person do it once. There's things like, again, retweeting things where you want as many people to do it as possible. So having those separated out and saying, hey, can people please do this is useful. So being able to go here, Marty, I'm retweeting this from your account. I hope that's okay. I'm using your laptop for this. All right, and then, okay, I did this, so I got 5 karma points for that, and then what else? So I was mentioned in a chat room, so if we go there, we should see this. So this is like sort of a sub-project of Pursuance that we've been working on for a while called LeapChat. Anyone in the world can go to leapchat.org, do end-to-end encrypted chat in the browser, and it looks kind of like this. So once we add one more feature along the right panel there, which is black to match our theme, we'll have like kind of the details of the task that people are discussing, right? So you assign something to me, I want to ask clarification. Having kind of a full chat room and have everything in Pursuance be real time is definitely something we've aimed for. So yeah, so this is what we got: the ability to do end-to-end encrypted chat task management, real-time chat. As you can see along the left here, the ability to like share files, share documents. So there's 2 kinds of pursuances. There's public ones and private ones. Private ones are where everything is encrypted, all messages, all tasks, all files. And then there's public pursuances, which we'll have it be where it can be invite only or not. If people want it to be more like kind of a subreddit, but where people do things instead of just talking about things, then they'll be able to do that. But yeah, this is what we got. That's Pursuance.
All right. So we'll open it up for questions. If you guys,
I have some slides to go into a few more details, and then
before questions,
and then comments from Barrett, and then let's do Q&A after that. How's that?
Okay. I kind of wanted to make sure nobody had something burning they wanted to ask after the demo. No? Okay, you are free to go.
All right, thank you. All right, people see stuff. All right, so who here would like to be one of the first people in the world to try the Pursuance system? Awesome. So let's see, Annalise and AJ and Kevin Gallagher, can you stand up real quick? Or Kevin might be downstairs. So talk to either me or one of those 2, and we would love to do We would love to do sort of a user test. So like making the interface as intuitive as possible is something that we care about a lot. A lot of things that are security oriented blame you if you can't figure out the software. I want to take a page from the startup world, and we blame us if you can't figure out the software. So this shouldn't have to be a computer geek to use software that sort of protects your privacy. We also set up a special page for Aaron Swartz Day. If you go to pursuanceproject.org/ASD, ASD for Aaron Swartz Day, that's if you prefer not to talk to AJ and not to talk to Annalise or me or Kevin, please feel free to go to that site, and you can specify your email and see if you're interested in trying stuff out. So what is the sort of process that we went through to get here, right? So I collected lots of various insights, and then we had pretty early on Ray Johansson, who's part of the Pirate Party International Board of Directors. He's also on our board and our international coordinator. He made it really easy just to have this like amazing pool of activists in the chat server that I mentioned earlier that I could just draw from, and we decided, okay, which people do we think would get the most out of Pursuance? Who do we think would who would benefit most, who's kind of going to be representative of the kinds of activists that we want using this. And I talked to a bunch of people and synthesized those insights down into a small feature set. Then I made really ugly wireframes that other people I'll mention in a minute made look good. Recruited some developers. We built stuff. You literally wouldn't believe how much of what you just saw was built in the last 3 weeks by 4 people. So good job, Marty Muhammad and Sebastian, kicking ass. So I just mentioned there's public and private pursuances. Private ones, everything is encrypted. And I made this point a few minutes ago. Like things like these other tools talk about teams. They picture all these silos of small groups, and that's not what we want, right? We want these different groups that can coordinate between each other. So this is a quote that from Rick Falkvinge's book that Barrett mentioned earlier. Your most valuable asset isn't your employees; it's the thousands of people who want to work for free, and you don't let them. So that is very much how we see things. I sent Barrett that quote, and he was amazed that at least one other person sees the world the way he does. So normally, to get these sorts of features, you have too many different things you have to deal with. So we're going to take a page out of the book of Proton Mail, which does something pretty cool, right? So if you have your normal Gmail account or something, and then you create a Proton Mail account, when you get a new email in your Proton Mail account, they will notify the email address that you're used to checking if you tell them that it exists. But in that notification, they don't say who the email's from. They don't even say your email address that is kind of your Proton Mail address that's relevant to that email. It just says you have 3 new messages or something like that. I think that's really powerful. So with pursuances, if you don't have to put your email address in at all, just username and password. But if you do specify it, the emails that we send will just say things like you've been mentioned, or kind of telling you there's something you should go check, but not saying what it is. And of course, in most cases, people will be using private pursuances, and in that case, our mail server won't know what you're being notified about. All of that information will be encrypted for private pursuances. So again, the ability to assign stuff to other groups is important. The ability to kind of say, hey, I need help, and kind of broadcast a message out there and say, and kind of, the goal, right, is to efficiently direct resources. It seems like everything is just a giant chat room, and it's chaotic, and people don't have what they need. So the ability to assign skills based on tasks, I alluded to that. And there's a sort of encryption technique. It uses encryption based on some research that I did that I presented at the DEF CON Hacker Conference 2 years ago. We're going to leverage that key idea for pursuances. So basically, in each person's profile in a pursuance, they will specify various skills, and we will sort of encrypt and hash those skills, and the server will have this sort of identifier that represents a skill, but it won't see what that skill is. That makes it so you can assign things to people based on skill set without revealing to the server what all of your skills are. If people listed literally every skill that they have, I'm concerned that could start to like de-anonymize people potentially. But rapidly creating structured tasks, I mentioned that. That is very unique. If you're used to Redmine, you can very slowly and painstakingly fill out this giant form and then wait 3 seconds for the page to reload, and then you can make a second task. That's no good. And then there's things like Asana or other task management things where you can quickly make a list. But we really want to enable people to do much more ambitious things than most systems permit right now. So being able to start with like a high-level goal and break it down to as many small pieces as you need to, so that where each of those things leads up to the ambitious thing that you're trying to achieve. So when I use these other systems, it seems like it's just too hard to do that. And if you need one thing to be done before you can do something else, like there's generally good luck doing that with Trello, right? It's just a big pile of things to do. So we will be adding federation. So this is a question we get a lot, right? So it's like, okay, you have a Pursuance system server, and all this is open source, of course. You have this server, you have a bunch of people, you have many pursuances on that server, you have people collaborating through it. But the concern that some people have is like, well, that could be a single point of failure if everyone is using this one thing. So we will be adding federation so that you can you set up your server, I set up my server, and we can optionally have them peer with each other. I'll be talking about that in more detail tomorrow. I think it's 2 to 3, more of a technical deep dive on Pursuance tomorrow. So, but having multiple people be able to kind of collaborate through multiple servers as if it's the same server, that's a feature that a lot of people said they want. We're starting off with so that we can iterate very quickly and kind of deploy multiple times per day if we need to. We're going to kind of start with we're about to start alpha testing. That's very exciting. Iterate on the interface and build out some more of the backend stuff. There's some encryption stuff that we still need to add, and then we'll be bundling this stuff as mobile and desktop apps. So there's a technology called React that allows us to kind of reuse about 80% of our code that's for a web application and bundle that into a native application, like a app that you would install on Android or iOS. And there's something else called Electron that lets us bundle that into a desktop app. So we're excited about that. So AJ and I the other day were brainstorming about a plugin system. We think that could be really powerful, and we so it wouldn't be like a full app store probably, but being able to kind of augment the functionality of Pursuance in a very dynamic way, so people can add the functionality they want and do that securely, is something that is exciting. Like I said, being able to use karma points combined with the skill-based assigning of tasks is a powerful combination. So of course we're only using crypto that has been either it's all open source. It's either thoroughly audited and or written by a crypto expert. There's no reason for us to roll our own crypto. That doesn't make any sense. We want to use existing solid crypto libraries and then build this kind of build secure app on top of it. Every Pursuance will be accessible as a Tor hidden service. So in the kind of normal kind of server like distribution of Pursuance, we'll make the default config such that that Pursuance is available as a Tor hidden service. And of course, if you combine that with the idea of federation, you can have kind of normal ClearNet, internet Pursuance servers that can peer with Pursuance servers that are Tor only, because all of them will be on Tor. Let's see here, and then other security stuff, secure headers. Our JavaScript can't talk to other domains and stuff like that. So we care very much about usability. So that is not common enough in secure software, right? So PGP has existed since 1991, and I'm not sure that anyone's really made a reasonably easy to use interface for it. There's some stuff that is, there's things like Mailpile that is mostly done project and the UI is good, but I think they ran out of money. And then there's, I saw an not an interview, but a conference of the creator of PGP Phil Zimmerman, and he was still mocking users for being idiots for not being able to figure out the pain in the ass command line stuff. I thought that was quite a sad thing. It's been 26 years, quarter of a century, can't build a usable interface for a PGP. All right, that's wonderful. So we're avoiding those mistakes by talking to real users, and like I said, pursuanceproject.org/ASD is where you can directly help with that. So another issue has to do another accessibility issue, right? It's like you can have some amazing piece of software on GitHub, and it's like non-technical people could really benefit from using this, but how are they supposed to deploy it? You know, you have stuff that's in Git, you have stuff that's online, so it's like you shouldn't have to be a Linux systems administrator to like figure out how to spin up a DigitalOcean server or Amazon Web Services or whatever, and then SSH in and configure things. That's not how it should work. But people do, in various cases, want to have their own server that they have full control over, right? I mean, like the current solution to that is like you don't have to run your own mail server, but Google hosts all of it. So the uptime is really good, but there's some privacy loss. So anyway, there's all these trade-offs. So one thing that Pursuance is going to be doing is if there's like any sort of group of people and they're like, we're non-technical, but we want our own server. Well, we can run some scripts and like spin people up their own server, and we configure it and just kind of hand it to them. And then just like with like WordPress or something, people just access it through the browser. The first account that gets created there is like administrator and stuff like that. So that should make it more accessible for people to kind of have their own server while being non-technical. So yep, and then so December 1st we plan to start a Kickstarter campaign. So that will be very exciting. We'll be announcing that via our mailing list, which now has over 1,100 people signed up for it, thanks to Barrett's Writings and Raincoaster, a couple people we have helping us out. So if you go to pursuanceproject.org, there is a form there where you can sign up for the mailing list. And as of like 2 hours ago, we have a donation page. So pursuanceproject.org/donate. People feel so inclined, that would be awesome. So another thing so like a key theme that I noticed in talking to people who kind of help coordinate a large number of activists is they kind of keep having to do manual work that it seems like you should be able to partially automate. So they'll like tell someone to work on something, and then if they haven't worked on it in a while, they'll have to notice that, and then they will have to like remember to message them again or like reassign that work or something like that. I'm excited by the possibility of being able to kind of automate or at least semi-automate as much of that as possible. So if you could tell the system, assign this task to somebody, and then if the status of that task doesn't change and there's like no sign of progress in like 3 days, then like automatically reassign it to a new person who has the right skill set or something like that. You can imagine the system being kind of self-healing in that way, where if individual people drop off or people are less reliable, then we can kind of automatically reassign stuff, and then the karma, of course the karma points will help with that, right? Like who's getting things done. We will add a feature so that on people's profiles, sort of LinkedIn style, like if you do a task and there's like 3 skills that were required for it, you should get like a +1 for each of those 3 specific skills that you have, because we know that you did something that requires those skills. So that's another aspect that should make this more efficient over time and have it be kind of efficiently self-healing in ways that I don't believe exist in any other system. So there's something that Barrett briefly alluded to, is a sort of Pursuance library. So Barrett realized a long time ago that like, okay, if you have these different groups and there's overlap in what different different groups are doing, then when one group figures out like some way of operating that is a lot more efficient that they kind of stumble upon, then it would be great that if someone else came along and tried to do something similar, that they could somehow automatically benefit from that without having to kind of start from scratch. So we're still figuring out like what some of these kind of variables are that we can kind of harness. I mean, we talked about, when you start a Pursuance, you're sort of like you're kind of like the god of it, sort of like a dictator. If you want to like invite people and give them very high privileges, then you should be able to do that. And we've designed a pretty elaborate permission system based on the feedback I got from various users, where there's about it's not just kind of admin and normal user, there's about 6 tiers. And the lowest one being like if there's somebody that you don't necessarily trust that much, but you want to see if they seem good, you can invite them to the system, and then they will only be able to see the tasks that they have been assigned. They can't see what anyone else is working on. And then there's encryption that sort of backs this up, where there's kind of different categories of tasks depending upon kind of the permissions level of who's working on it, and those are encrypted with different keys, so blah, blah, blah. The person with the least privileges can't get a crypto key that can like decrypt a bunch of stuff in the, on the server, even if they got access to that information somehow. So anyway, having a Pursuance library where like one group sees, you know, like a certain tree structure or a certain kind of, you know, subtree of tasks is, you know, is like one way to effectively break up the work for like accomplishing something. We're going to make it so they can optionally donate that to the Pursuance library, and then kind of try to show that to people in the right context. So if they're trying to accomplish something similar, then they can benefit from that work that people have figured out. So another thing that we'll be adding is the ability to, so I was talking to different people about what they want. It's like, okay, do you want to kind of give someone a lot of trust initially and then they can abuse it, or you like invite them and they don't really have many permissions, but then they like can't do things that might be useful? And it seemed like a tricky dichotomy of like, you know, should someone be able to create tasks? Should they not be able to? And some clever person said, well, what if they could just sort of suggest tasks? So they have an idea, it doesn't kind of automatically get added to what the official work is that people are going to do, but it is it is an idea that like admins can check. And if this person keeps suggesting good ideas, then that can be this kind of intermediate step where you can be like, okay, this person seems good, I'll let them just like add stuff automatically. Oh, and something I didn't mention about karma points that is useful is, so many of you here will be familiar with the notion of a Sybil attack, where if one person can kind of create many accounts, and then there's various ways that those could be abused, right? Like if you can kind of upvote things on, you know, Reddit and kind of game that system, or retweet things and make something trend that like, you know, really isn't trending. It's like a very small number of people, or it's something that shouldn't be trending. So there's issues there, and people will be getting karma points for people kind of upvoting work that they've done. But based on some research that that Annalise Burkhardt, who's part of the core team, figured out, is if you have this sort of barrier to entry, or even after people join, they need to kind of do a certain amount of work in order for their kind of upvotes to count. That is, anyway, that's one kind of a security-ish dynamic that we're leveraging. So I wrote an equation out that I'll probably show tomorrow during the deep dive. That's like, you know, you need, like if you have fewer than 50 karma points, you can upvote people's stuff and try to, you know, upvote your friends' things and try to make a bunch of accounts or get a bunch of invites and keep upvoting stuff to try to game the system. But until you've done significant work on like any of those accounts that you have, then it'll look like you're influencing things, but you actually won't be. So what are some likely early pursuances? So like I said, we've been able to talk to an impressive kind of network of activists, and there's some really interesting stuff out there that we're excited to help out with Pursuance, and they're very interested in using it. So there's this woman, Erin Gallagher. She is working on a kind of unmasking Twitter bots via social network analysis. So, you know, kind of a common problem these days, right? So you have a bunch of tweets, and it's like, that's probably an automated account, or that's some sort of automated troll. And, you know, I didn't realize it, but I sort of implicitly accepted that, you know, it's like, I'm not going to be able to have access to like Twitter's data, and you just kind of see people's messages. It's hard to figure out kind of what's going on. She, you know, sometimes it's very hard to tell what is a bot and what isn't. But sometimes you really can't tell. So Erin has done some very interesting visualizations where you can see like the networks between different people. And she said she noticed that when something is a bot and it's sort of more obviously a bot, then it will kind of only interact with like with the other bots that it's kind of part of the same kind of cluster with, that are kind of controlled by the same user. But a real human will be interacting with like a more kind of, like a broader array of different users. So she's very interested in having kind of data scientists and some math people and researchers help her and kind of, improve the math, improve the visualizations, and, make it so we can understand like who's actually a person and who's kind of gaming various things online, especially through Twitter. So that's very interesting. And just, I think yesterday, for the Internet Archive, she created a social network data visualization. So, and she has, where did I put it? Here's the link, medium.com/Aaron_Gallagher. She has like various blog posts, and she's like, okay, here's a visualization of the Unite the Right hashtag, and these people seem to be bots, and those people are real. It's very, very interesting. And when it comes to like swaying public opinion by pretending that a majority really believes X, what they don't, like I think this is a big deal for democracies and like understanding reality and what people actually believe.
So Steve?
So another early pursuance that we're excited about, there's something called Anti-Spy Bill that the Internet Party of New Zealand is working on. So they told me a list of things. I forget most of them, but there's some things, various things historically that have kind of originated in New Zealand. I think they said women's right to vote, indigenous people's rights, and a few other things. And they said that when there's like a new kind of mass surveillance, I don't know, technique or something that is being tried out, it will be sort of prototyped in New Zealand, where it's like, I think it said 4.5 million people. And then if those techniques work there, then they will tend to spread throughout the Western world. So we want to do kind of the opposite dynamic, where instead of something bad originating in New Zealand and then spreading throughout the West, we would like to have this anti-spy bill that they've drafted that is like protecting, civil liberties, protecting right to privacy in particular. If that could get passed in New Zealand, then that could be a big deal. And they're interested in using Pursuance to kind of organize all the people who want to help see that happen. Basic income has been